One day, which seemed like any other, an elderly man from Japan was suddenly reborn in another world. His new body was completely different, and now he was no longer an ordinary worker, but part of a completely different life. The hero received not a simple body, but the body of a descendant of aristocrats. In front of the mirror stood an unusually handsome 10-year-old boy who could not believe his own reflection. He looked at himself, touched his cheeks and hair, trying to get used to the new image. His past life was left behind, and the man suddenly became several decades younger and the protagonist of his own story. He experienced wealth, happiness, and new opportunities that were radically different from his mundane old routine. On a sunny day in this kingdom, a young hero engages in a duel with one of the court warriors and confidently wins. The defeated man, throwing away his weapon, exclaims that he surrenders, because he does not believe in the boy's amazing skill. Deep down, he is still a middle-aged man, but to those around him he is Kane Carlier, a 10-year-old heir to a noble family, known not only for his swordsmanship but also for his rare alchemical abilities. The boy looks at the warrior with tired eyes and says that he has seen through his deception. Despite his childish appearance, his life experience and age at heart make him too hardened to succumb to simple tricks. Ignoring the words, Kane confidently places his hands at his sides and announces that practice is enough. He releases the warrior, allowing him to go. The man bows low, thanks him, and quickly leaves the courtyard without looking back. Sighing, the boy also decides to return to his own affairs. He feels incredibly lucky to be in this body. He is young, beautiful thanks to his mother, of aristocratic origin, and has all the privileges of noble blood. Having adjusted his jacket and tightened his belt, Kane smiles joyfully, feeling that his current life resembles a real fairy tale, where his role is like that of the lucky chosen one of fate, to whom all doors are open. However, the world he finds himself in has strict laws, where a person's fate is determined by their origin. Birth into a particular family, beauty and status immediately pave the way for the future, changing their entire future life. The boy gets on one knee, puts the other leg forward, and looks intently at the ground, raising his hand and slowly bending his fingers. He is only 10 years old, but he already possesses an exceptional ability that no one else can boast of. Touching the ground with his left hand, and later with his right, the boy concentrates. He is able to use all the elements hidden in the depths of the soil to transform them into something completely new and amazing. Closing his eyes, the young aristocrat takes a deep breath and channels all his inner energy to create something unseen. Opening his eyelids, he whispers a spell, endowing the land with alchemical magic that bends to his will. At that moment, the ground begins to tremble, and the boy presses his palm harder into the soil. Bright lightning bursts from the depths, stones rise into the air, and the earth itself seems to come to life under his spell. Crystals rise from the ground, rapidly forming in a small area. Suddenly a sword, wrapped in lightning, begins to emerge from among them, and the boy stares in amazement at this incredible sight. Taking the weapon in his hands, the young gentleman examines it carefully, feels its weight, and raises it above his head. He says with satisfaction that the sword turned out to be quite good, since he managed to create it from metals hidden in the earth. Holding the sword in one hand, Kane smiles and marvels at his own abilities. After all, alchemy, as we know, is a true art where you can't make something out of nothing, and his power is even more admirable. In this world, alchemy was first used to create medicines and extract minerals. For generations, the Carlier family secretly developed medicines, saving people from a variety of epidemics and diseases. Thanks to this, their family has received great respect from the crown itself. Therefore, the eldest son of the family must skillfully wield a sword, study alchemy, and continue the work of his ancestors. And the young man, having dusted off his shoulder, decides that he has enough time to allow himself to rest. The weather outside the window was wonderful. The bright sun flooded everything around with light. A light breeze swayed the treetops, and slow clouds floated smoothly across the sky, creating a feeling of peace and harmony. Kane recalls what his life was like back then. Back then, he couldn't afford to sleep during the day, because endless worries forced him to sit in the office at the monitor, looking at the screen and his colleagues with disgust, feeling only hatred for what was happening around him. Now the young nobleman lies on the grass and looks up at the blue sky, remembering how he used to work late in his office and only come home during rush hour. Such mundanity was even worse than just a miserable existence. Compared to the past world, this one allows you to develop properly and live in a completely new way, without unnecessary worries and the burden of daily worries, which cannot but please the main character. The boy smiles, closes his eyes, and rests his cheek against the soft grass that tickles him gently. He thinks that life now resembles heaven on earth, but there is only one thing missing. If he were a little older, he could afford a mug of drink in a tavern or at home. But suddenly a voice is heard from the bushes and trees, persistently calling for the young owner, looking for him everywhere, as if this is not the first time they have encountered his disappearances. And at that very moment, a dog's snout jumps out, following the boy's scent. It turns out that the man-dog hybrid, who was his loyal companion, had been searching for him all this time. Jumping out of the bushes, the stranger immediately sees Cain lying and resting on the grass. He begins to loudly reproach that this is not the first time this has happened, and it is completely unclear what to do with this restless young gentleman. The hybrid screams, calling for its young master, and the boy wakes up instantly. His face is a mixture of fear and surprise. His eyes are wide open. His head jerks around at the sound that has shattered his midday peace. The young man asks in a trembling voice if Zen is really standing before him, and blinks his eyes several times, trying to regain clarity of vision instead of scattered sleep. Finally, noticing Zen approaching, the boy wants to say something, but is interrupted. The talking dog hands him a bowl of water, saying that although he doesn't know why the master fell asleep here, the warm water will help him wake up. The boy accepts it and thanks the servant, sighing with disappointment, as his peaceful rest was ruined. Cain leaned back against the hard bark of the tree and raised the bottle of warm water to his lips, swallowing slowly and as if driving away the bitterness of the lost moment. Meanwhile, the kobold slave Zen, who is 32 years old, constantly scolds the boy. He reminds him that Cain is completely lazy, and when he was his age, he devoted himself from morning to night to studies and hard work. But things weren't that simple. Zen was once a local merchant, but his own reckless machinations led him to ruin, and he ended up in slavery, where he is forced to work out the consequences of his mistakes. The young man recalls the day he first saw his current servant. Zen stood among the criminals in chains, looking at everyone around him with a gloomy and hostile look. The boy recognizes his wisdom and loyalty, but at the same time finds him too loud and annoying. The young master looks at the servant with an uncomprehending look. Zen gestures actively, trying to explain that he understands the boy and knows that something is bothering him. Cain only raises an eyebrow, waiting to hear a real explanation. With sadness in his eyes, the kobold finally speaks. It has been less than 10 days since the young master's respected grandfather died. Cain recalls that grandfather Leopold was an almost legendary figure in their family. Leopold was easily recognizable. His long beard, heavy armor, giant weapons, and shield in his hands made him unique. During his life, he conquered many lands and earned the title of Duke, leaving behind the glory of a formidable warrior. Although Cain outwardly feigns sadness and melancholy in front of the servant, in reality he is not very concerned about his grandfather's death. He and Leopold have hardly spoken, and there is almost no genuine sadness in the boy's heart. Until the age of 3, the young master lived with his grandfather on the ancestral lands of the Carlier family. But for 7 years now he has been living in the royal capital, far from the memories of his childhood with Leopold. Thinking back, Cain becomes lost in his own thoughts. It seems to him that his grandfather was a living legend, and now the boy wonders what will happen to their family after the disappearance of this powerful figure. But, pushing aside his thoughts, the young man rolls his eyes and tells the kobold that after his grandfather's death, the duties will still pass to his father. In Cain's opinion, this does not concern him, and he can continue to enjoy a carefree life. Zen smiles and questions his words. The very next day, the unexpected happens. The boy's father collapses from illness. He is diagnosed with diabetes and hypertension. Lying in bed, he realizes that his body could not withstand the constant nightly feasts and endless luxury. Seeing this, Cain frowns. He notes that his father now looks like a sea beast washed ashore. The boy realizes that if Nicholas Carlier dies, his own carefree life will also end. Nicholas looks at his son with deep sadness in his eyes. In a trembling voice, he calls the boy closer, admitting that he is extremely difficult. Cain cannot refuse his 50-year-old father, but at the same time he is confused, not knowing how to behave. The boy feels as if his father is about to die. His mother, Louise Carlier, anxiously asks the doctor what to do, and whether it is possible to save her husband in this condition. The man with glasses and blonde hair replies that although Louise's husband's condition is serious, all ailments can be cured, although it will take a lot of time and patience. But Cain is not at all happy with this. He looks at his father with displeasure and wonders indignantly whether he really has to take on the responsibility of caring for and managing the family at such a young age. Covering his face with his hands, the boy sighs heavily, and his body begins to tremble and sway, which frightens the doctor. He asks anxiously if everything is okay. The young man says uncertainly that he is, but his weakness and trembling betray otherwise. But suddenly a bright light flashes in his eyes. He pushes aside thoughts of what has not yet happened. He stops and asks himself why he's even bothering with such useless worries. There are many maids on the estate, and without him, ready to help their father. Already 3 of them surround Nicholas, serve him hot tea and cover him with a warm blanket, preventing him from sinking into helplessness. With a sigh of relief, the boy heads for the exit. He resolutely leaves the room and says goodbye on the threshold, asking his father not to overexert himself and to get some rest. The father, Nicola, responds to his son with a farewell smile. Receiving due attention from the maids, he waves his hand and looks at him with satisfaction. After leaving the castle, the boy goes to the market where he is immediately met by vendors. One of the boys calls out to him, saying that some juicy apples have just arrived and that he should definitely try them. Nearby is another shop, where a plump girl with a headband calls out to a young gentleman, boasting that she has prepared fragrant pastries and is waiting for him. Smiling and looking around, Cain takes an apple, takes a bite of it, and admits that while he likes life on the estate, strolling through the market quarter is much more interesting than sitting idle within 4 walls. Kobold Zen also holds a bitten apple and thinks that it is during such walks that you can see the real life of the capital, feel its pulse, and taste things that you would never find on the estate. In the bustling shopping district, another vendor notices the boy and shouts loudly, showing off a huge fish. He says that today's catch is rich and he is ready to deliver the fresh fish straight to the estate. Looking around the streets, crowded with people and noise, the boy thinks that his parents are sitting in the estate day after day, and wonders how they still haven't gotten tired of living locked within 4 walls. But Zen immediately objects, saying that the young master will eventually have to do the same thing as his parents. The boy abruptly interrupts the servant, categorically disagreeing and not even wanting to hear about such a prospect. The servant throws up his hands helplessly and asks if the boy won't think about the family's affairs even after his father's illness. But Cain stubbornly refuses and doesn't want to hear about it, wanting to continue living at his own pace. Sighing heavily, Zen says that the young gentleman has not changed at all. He is still a recluse, does not make friends, communicates only with the servants on the estate and the traders in the market, avoiding any sincere acquaintances among other children. Shrugging, Cain replies that the gap between aristocrats and commoners is too great to make true friends. The servant thinks about this, sniffs and scratches the back of his head, finding no objections. But suddenly someone loudly calls out to young Mr. Cain. Hearing an unfamiliar voice, the boy looks over his shoulder, making a questioning sound and trying to understand who is addressing him. His face instantly lights up with joy. A salt merchant named Randolph stands before him. The man is dressed in dark clothes, has a keffiyeh on his head, and his face is adorned with distinctive stubble. The young gentleman asks a completely logical question. What is the leading salt merchant in the capital doing in such a place? In response, the interlocutor laughs loudly, admitting that Cain has hit the mark again. It turns out that he had just finished talking to a client and happened to meet him. Not missing an opportunity for sarcasm, the boy remarks that the merchant is just hanging around doing nothing. The merchant feigns offense, replying that the sun is still too high to be sitting in taverns with wine in his hands right now. But Cain continues to tease Randolph, implying that he has too much free time. The merchant awkwardly replies that he wouldn't say that, trying to justify himself. The young man finishes him off by saying that the merchant is still single. This takes Randolph by surprise. He is so confused that he can't even find a response. He just blinks. In the capital, wealthy people usually take their time getting married, because there are always enough women around to keep company without a wedding ring on their finger. And Randolph was one of those rich people who take their time. The man immediately objects, saying he wants to meet a pretty girl and then get married. But Cain only mockingly remarks that he is not getting any younger and may end up an old man with money but no love or family. The merchant does not like these thoughts. He thinks the young gentleman speaks too strangely, and now he even begins to doubt his age, feeling himself put in an awkward position. The boy just chuckles and says nothing in response. In his past life, he has met many men like Randolph, but of course no one knows about it and will never know. That same night, in the house where Cain lived with his family, the boy is called in for a conversation. Knocking on his father's bedroom door, Cain asks permission to enter, then, crossing the threshold, looks at his parents with a confused expression on his face. The man, with his hands folded on his stomach, says that they have been waiting for him. Next to him sits Louise's mother, smiling contentedly and as if enjoying her own thoughts. Seeing this smile and his mother's narrowed gaze, the boy immediately realizes that nothing good will come of this conversation. He hesitantly asks his mother if she might be planning something bad against him. Louise answers evasively, and the young man immediately senses that the matter is clearly dirty, and that his parents are up to something. The father intervenes, breaking an awkward pause between son and mother. It turns out they wanted to talk about the former princess of the kingdom, and believe that marrying her could be a happy solution for their son. Cain is angered by such words. He thinks that for his parents this is just a profitable deal, where status and money are taken into account, while his own fate hardly matters to them. He is offered to marry a plump woman, powerful and influential, but not particularly beautiful. The guy doesn't even want to see her, mentally calling her a status mare who only causes disgust. 2 years ago there was already talk of his engagement to a princess from the Ramra clan. At that time, the parents were actually ready to sell their son for money and high status. His father tries to convince him, reminding him that the princess was delighted with him. But Cain himself has only unpleasant memories of his meetings with her. Barely able to contain his rage, Cain demands the right to decide for himself who he wants to marry. In his imagination, there is a completely different girl, much more beautiful than the one they are trying to impose on him. The mother can't help but laugh as she watches the situation unfold. The boy looks at her indignantly, saying that such behavior is unworthy, but Louise just brushes it off, assuring her that she would never laugh at her own son. The young man recalls that his mother was once a simple actress in a theater troupe who was always in need of money. She skillfully married and became an aristocrat, but her thirst for profit and profitable connections never disappeared. Louise says that first impressions of meeting the princess can be deceiving, and that she should be given another chance. But the young gentleman flatly refuses, once again appealing to his father to let him decide on his own marriage. Nicholas sighs heavily and tells his son that he is being too stubborn. Looking at his wife, he admits that the boy has clearly given in to his mother. Scratching his beard, the man adds that he was not called to discuss a marriage that would be beneficial to their family. He emphasizes the word beneficial, which irritates the boy even more, because his father doesn't even hide his true intentions. The man's face changes dramatically. His gaze becomes sterner, his features more serious. He wants to talk to Cain like a real father to his son, frankly, and without jokes. The head of the family begins by talking about his own illness, explaining that his body can no longer cope with the years. But Cain just thinks that Nicola is being overly dramatic, because the doctor said that in time he will definitely recover, even if it will take a lot of effort. It turns out that the doctor advised the man to stay in the capital and undergo long-term treatment there. The guy begins to guess what his father is up to, but remains silent, not daring to express his suspicions. Keeping a serious expression, Nicola continues to say that after his father's death, taxes stopped coming from the territories to the capital. He straightens the warm blanket on himself and looks at his son, who is speechless. The man gives his son an order. As the eldest in the Carlier family, he is obliged to deal with this, and starting tomorrow the boy must set out for the family lands and fulfill the duties of a lord. The young man bursts into a cry of despair. He looks from his father to his mother, hoping that everything he has heard will turn out to be a joke and that his words should not be taken seriously. Nicola doesn't understand this reaction and asks his son if he really disagrees, but Cain immediately denies it, clenching his fist in the air and exclaiming that he categorically disagrees with this decision. The only argument that comes to the boy's mind is his age. He reminds him that he is only 10 years old, but this does not stop Nicola. The father only says in surprise that his son looks too old anyway. Hurrying to reassure, the head of the family explains that the family's lands are not as vast as the capital, but they are rich in natural gifts, with delicious food and excellent wine. He tries to make everything look more attractive. In these lands, Nicola adds, 4,000 loyal soldiers and good residents who love their land will await the boy. Age does not matter here, if Cain inherited the talent from his father, because he will be the one who will be able to collect taxes. But the boy doesn't give up. He comes up with the idea of asking a neighboring lord to collect taxes for him, because it will be much easier and without any worries. This proposal greatly annoys the father. He calls Cain an idiot, explaining that allowing strangers to collect taxes means saying goodbye to their family's money forever. Louise supports her husband. She explains to her son that this is no joke at all, and that you should never trust financial matters to strangers. After all, only a family member should handle such matters. The boy almost gives up and, in a trembling voice, suggests entrusting this task to someone more responsible. But his father assures him that Cain will cope quite well on his own. Nicholas Carlier considers his son an intelligent and capable heir to the family, and only he, in his opinion, can be entrusted with such an important matter as managing the lands and collecting taxes. All the boy's objections are shattered by these words. His father's phrase, "You'll do it," sounds like an alarm bell to Cain, repeating in his head over and over. The next day, Kane, along with his servant Zen and several soldiers, sets off for the Carlier family's territory. Their carriage slowly moves along a road surrounded by dense forest. After 3 grueling days of travel, the young lord and his kobold servant finally reach their destination. Before their eyes are identical village houses and dense treetops. Shrugging his shoulders, the young man mutters that this place looks like an ordinary village, calm and unremarkable, without any features that could impress him. The servant asks if he really thinks so, because it seems that the local landscapes do not make much of an impression on him at all. The guy, a little confused and silent for a few seconds, awkwardly replies that Zen is wrong, and in fact everything looks quite good and orderly. A stranger named Granto, the captain of the guard who had accompanied him on his journey, approaches the young man. Addressing Kane, the man points to the locals who have come out to greet their new host. Later, Kane learns from the captain that the villagers are literally delighted with him, because he is the grandson of the former ruler of these lands. The guy immediately realizes that he will not be let go so easily. Taking the opportunity, the young man asks the captain if he would mind serving here with him. The man is visibly embarrassed, as his health has been failing him greatly in recent years, especially his stomach after a change in diet. A completely logical question arises in Kane's mind. If he arrived here with a servant, will they have to set up camp for the night? The captain nods, explaining that the inhabitants have already been warned and tents are prepared for the night. Zen adds that that's not all. The servants must prepare for the meeting with the new lord, because for them it is an important event. Leopold himself once said that subordinates should be given time for their own affairs, so the official audience will take place tomorrow afternoon. The sun had long since set, and the camp was filled with nightly silence. But suddenly it was broken by a sharp cry, announcing the bandits' attack on the temporary camp. In a nightgown and a cap on his head, the servant Zen crashes into the young master's tent, shouting excitedly about the robbers' attack and trying to wake him up. The half-asleep boy mumbles what happened, but the kobold continues to shake him and pull his arm, shouting that they must flee immediately or they will die. The young man asks if this is really an attack by bandits. In response, Zen quickly explains that Mr. Granto is at that very moment desperately fighting off hundreds of bandits. Kane's confused gaze wanders around the tent. In a trembling voice, he asks if the enemies have really invaded their lands. Hearing the affirmative answer, he wonders what could have brought them here. The servant tries to convince the boy that it is more important to escape now than to think about it in vain. But Kane stubbornly stands his ground. After all, they have 25 armed soldiers with them, who, in his opinion, are quite capable of dealing with uninvited guests. The kobold corrects the young lord, explaining that there are actually far fewer soldiers than he thought, only 20 left. This causes a wave of anger and incomprehension in the boy, as his eyes burn with indignation at such an admission. Kane asks where the other 20 warriors went. Zen sighs and replies that they all simply fled in fear, as best they could. The young man cannot understand how armed men could abandon the battlefield and act like cowards. The deserters had been hired in the royal capital. They had neither the duty nor the desire to give their lives for Lord Kane. They were not paid enough to risk death, so at the crucial moment the soldiers scattered, saving their own skins. Realizing the situation, the boy begins to think that his life could end right here, at the hands of the bandits who attacked the camp, and that he is doomed to become their prey. But the captain of the guard, Granto, hired in the capital, did not flee. His relatives lived in these lands, and if he had left the battlefield, his family would have been executed for treason against the Carlier family. This was what forced him to stay and fight to the end. The 5 loyal knights, though terrified, did not budge and decided to stand their ground until the end, just to give Kane a chance to escape the village and find a safe haven away from the battle. Gathering all his courage, the captain exclaims that victory or defeat is now irrelevant. He looks straight into the eyes of his enemies who are already preparing to attack, clutching swords and axes in their hands, ready for a bloody fight. With his shield drawn and his weapon brandished, the commander rushes forward, attacking his enemies first and ready to take anyone who stands in his way to his grave. At this time, the young master is running through the dark forest with his loyal servant. Zen shouts to him to run even faster, saving his life. A multitude of thoughts are swirling in the boy's head. He remembers his father saying that there are 4,000 loyal knights and kind residents here who will always help and not leave him in trouble. But now the question arises. Where did the hundreds of bandits who plunder these lands with impunity come from? And how can taxes be collected from people if they suffer from constant attacks from enemies? As he climbs over rocks and hills, the boy mentally curses his father, calls him a cursed seal, and swears that when he returns home he will definitely give him a beating for everything that happened that night. The hero's legs buckle, his strength leaves his body. He loses his balance and almost falls headfirst into the ground, but manages to grab onto a tree trunk. Gathering himself, he doesn't stop and continues running. Kane can't figure out how long he's been running like this. His breathing is labored, his legs are shaking, everything is floating before his eyes, but fear drives him forward. It seems to him that he still hasn't broken away from his pursuers. Stopping near a tree and leaning against it, the boy breathes heavily and tries to make sense of everything that has happened. And only now does the thought stick in his head. He has indeed been appointed the local lord. The carriage in which he arrived was carved with the Carlier family crest, so the bandits knew exactly who they were attacking. And in Kane's opinion, it would be more logical to flee rather than engage in a dangerous battle. But in the end, the boy is forced to run further, stumbling over rocks and branches. He is terribly afraid for his own life, because he does not know why the uninvited enemies have come and what goal they are pursuing. Exhausted, he falls onto the soft grass and loses consciousness for a while. The only thought running through his head is that he won't be able to run anymore, and if he gets caught, it will be the end. Kane is awakened by a harsh, unfamiliar voice, ordering him to get up immediately. The boy mutters discontentedly, not understanding who it is and what they want from him at such a moment. But because of the intrusiveness of the voice, he suddenly jumps up and angrily shouts at the person who woke him up. Waving his hand, he demands silence and even tries to elbow the stranger. But, frozen, the boy suddenly looks with fear into the face of the man who spoke these words. Kane whispers that this voice seems strange and suspicious to him. The light from a burning torch cuts through the darkness. Looking around in fear, the boy sees a stern-bearded man shining his light directly into his face and asking what he is doing here at such a late hour. However, the man perceives him not as a boy, but as a young girl. So do other people with torches, emerging from the darkness between the trees. One of the old men mutters that this stranger smells surprisingly delicious. Wrapping his arms around his shoulders, Kane realizes that he has been mistaken for a girl because of his overly handsome face, long hair, and the smell of the expensive perfume he was using. Carefully looking around, the boy tries to figure out how many enemies are in front of him. In the light of the torches, he sees 4 men, but more emerge from the shadows, making 6 of them now. Reflecting on the situation, Kane realizes that there are not as many enemies as he first thought, but this does not make the situation any easier or reduce the danger. The boy knows that even with his fighting skills, he can't beat the grown men. Meanwhile, they approach from behind, laughing hoarsely and saying they will help the lost girl. Looking down, the young man realizes that there is no more time to think. If he does nothing now, this meeting will be fatal for him. He guesses that he was awakened by the voice of not one of these men, but an outsider, and in a sense it saved him. Raising his hand, the boy stares at it intently, and a plan of action forms in his head. Kane remembers that these lands are rich in iron. He presses his hand harder against the grass, thinking that if there is iron nearby, he will be able to use his alchemical abilities. Lightning suddenly appears under the boy's hands, which quickly spread further and further across the ground. Strangers with torches look around, cautiously approaching Kane, asking if he's okay and what's happening to him. The boy doesn't answer. He presses both palms even harder against the ground, touching it, and realizes that to escape, he will have to use all his strength and use the materials hidden deep in the soil. Suddenly, lightning flashes and explosive clouds rise all around, causing the torch-wielding men to wave their weapons in fear and scream that the earth itself is exploding. Kane uses this panic as an opportunity for action. The boy manages to climb up into the branches of one of the trees. He holds on there with the strength of his legs, breathing heavily, and hears the men going wild below, shouting that the so-called child is missing, and they begin a frantic search for her. Kane realizes that there is no point in running any further. They will catch up with him anyway. They have more strength, and he has no energy left after such a long escape. He purses his lips, realizing that there is no escape plan. Smiling bitterly, he notices how the same strangers, even in the eerie darkness, find traces leading to the tree. So he decides to wait until they come closer, not suspecting the power the young master really has. Focusing all his energy, the boy touches the bark of the tree, wraps his other hand around his own forearm, closes his eyes, and exhales deeply. Shining lightning bolts slide down his forearm, approaching his wrist. Kane puts all his strength into destroying the gang that attacked him. Explosions erupt again. The ground trembles underfoot, and one of the lightning bolts hits the bearded man who had earlier called the boy a little girl. With eyes wide open, the boy whispers a transmutation spell, and the attackers, losing consciousness, wave their torches, trying to see something, and shout that everything around them is shining and shaking again. Iron bars shoot up from the depths of the earth into the sky, rising upwards. They lock the attackers in a kind of cage, and they can only scream, bang on the bars, and try in vain to get out. The young man finally climbs down from the upper branches of the tree, holding his head. He has difficulty standing on his feet. He has used up too much strength during his escape in magic. The cage has 25 bars on each side, and the angry men do not stop demanding freedom. Breathing heavily, the boy tries to move a little further away to move on. Judging by the length of these iron rods, it seems that Cain created almost 100 swords at once. But now he considers himself safe, and after another cautious look around, he moves forward with slow, measured steps, albeit with great effort. He climbs over huge boulders, clinging to them, feeling his body become heavier, and his legs have long since refused to obey. They feel like cotton wool. He has no strength, but he has to go, because there is simply no choice. After swimming across the icy river, Cain holds onto his shoulder, dripping with water. His hair and clothes are soaked to the bone, and his body temperature is rapidly dropping, leaving only a shiver. Exhausted, he falls to the ground. Realizing that he may not die, but that survival will be difficult, the boy remembers how in his past life he often watched Discovery survival programs. This is the last thought that comes to his mind before he passes out. The wind rustles the leaves of the trees. A few yellowed leaves break off the branches and slowly fall to the ground. The sky gradually clears. The boy is cold in his damp clothes. Lying on the ground, he hugs himself with his arms, pressing against his body. Cain thinks that he would rather be lying in a warm bed right now than on this frozen ground. But suddenly, he feels someone's presence, and raising his head, he notices two dark silhouettes. Fear instantly appears on his face because he thinks it's the same old attackers again. Jumping up sharply, Cain looks at the two strangers, remaining in hiding, and asks who is here now. Peeking out of the hole he was hiding in, he suddenly scares the child. The toddler steps back sharply and calls out to his brother, leaving the boy in a rather awkward position. Behind this child stands another boy, clenching a small fist and looking determined, ready to protect the younger one if necessary. A boy with spiky hair abruptly asks who Cain is and what he forgot in someone else's garden. The young man doesn't understand what garden he's talking about, but then he suddenly realizes everything. Coming out of his hiding place where he spent the night, Cain apologizes for trespassing. He explains that he got lost in the night, which is why he ended up here. But the strange boy interrupts him, demanding a clear answer. Cain doesn't rush to answer. Standing in front of the boy, he runs his hand from the top of his head to the other guys, measuring their height, and realizes that they are the same. The kid just looks at him and asks why. Smiling, the young gentleman snaps his fingers, saying that he has a rather tempting offer for the guy. After a while, Cain and the guy have already exchanged clothes, and the main character offers him to keep his things. The stranger, confused, asks if he really seriously agrees to this. Cain nods confidently and holds out the rest of his clothes, replying that he is absolutely confident in the decision he has made. As he puts on his boots, the boy thanks both strangers once again for letting him spend the night in the garden and for agreeing to exchange clothes. It turns out they are the same size, so all the clothes fit perfectly. All this was necessary only so that the young man could blend in with the crowd and remain unnoticed. Then he would not be exposed too quickly. It was a great plan, even if it was not very convenient for the other party. At this moment, Cain says goodbye to his new acquaintances, waves goodbye, and they, looking after him in confusion, ask where he is going. But the boy doesn't answer. When one of them asks about the missing clothes, he jokingly suggests saying that the new outfit was given by a forest fairy. After that, he says goodbye again, and the boys are left in amazement and whisper about his age, but Cain doesn't hear it anymore. Finally emerging from the thick undergrowth, the young man heads towards a village visible in the hills. There are several huts behind a wooden fence, and the boy resolutely walks straight towards them. Having straightened his new, dirty and slightly smelly locks, which have become an excellent disguise, he is happy, because now no one will guess that he is an aristocrat sent here to collect taxes. However, a disturbing thought arises in his mind. The bandits might mistake the guy he swapped clothes with and capture him. However, in Cain's opinion, they won't kill him. They'll just interrogate him and then release him. There was still a lot left in his plans, to find his grandfather's estate, but he doesn't even know where it is located or how to find it. Deciding that he has had enough adventures, the young man lies down on the soft green grass under the sun, turns on his side and closes his tired eyes, thinking that he needs to rest first, and only then ask the locals. But even here he was not destined to sleep. Suddenly, a silhouette appears in front of him, stops, and sternly asks what he is doing in such a place. Cain jumps up with a scream in fright and, without even looking at who is in front of him, accidentally slides down the slope he was lying on and screams from the fall. A female silhouette looks at him and asks if everything is okay. But the boy, holding his nose, exclaims indignantly why it stinks so much of donkey manure here. The girl in the maid's clothes can't hold it in and starts laughing, immediately apologizing. She says she's sorry, but it's really impossible to lie in such a place. Finally, Kane realizes who scared him. It was the long-haired maid. After a while, the girl puts a damp cloth to the boy's forehead and apologizes again. She thought it was the country boy avoiding work again. Kane replies that he is not offended, and at the same time begins to carefully examine her and her outfit. The girl's appearance makes him think she's 15 or 16 years old. Her pure, snow-white skin, without spots or freckles, is not at all like a village girl's. Noticing his surprised look, she asks if something is wrong. Now she begins to question him. The girl says that she has never seen Kane in this village, and suddenly jokingly pokes his cheek with her finger. The guy quickly gets bored of this game because the girl keeps picking at him with her finger, so he seriously asks her to stop. It works. The maid asks if his parents worked at the Carlier estate, and that's when Kane remembers his original goal, to find his grandfather's estate. But the young man cannot reveal his true origins, so he replies that none of his relatives serve there. Instead, he asks how she even knows about the estate. The girl straightens her back, puffs out her chest proudly, and puts her hands on her hips. She claims that she knows about him because she works there herself, and that she is simply visiting her parents. Then Kane realizes that he has a wonderful opportunity. The maid takes his soft cheeks again with her long, thin fingers and says that if you look closely, he really is a pretty boy. Kane's cheeks instantly turn red. The embarrassed young man waves his hands, steps aside, and asks the girl to show him the way to the estate as soon as possible. After thinking a little, she asks where exactly he wants to go, and if he really wants to go to the Carlier estate, where she works. Bending down because of the height difference, the girl wonders why he would go there if no one in his family serves there. Kane sharply replies, "What's the difference after all?" Instead of being offended, the maid just smiles and starts laughing, finding the boy's words funny. The long-haired girl points to the carriage and suggests they go together, because it would be too difficult for a small child to overcome the mountains on foot. The guy is amazed at his luck. After his nightly adventures, meeting this maid was a real miracle and great luck. She guesses that Kane must be hungry, and suggests that he run over to her house for something to eat if he wants. The girl adds that the estate has luxurious rooms and delicious tea, which she will definitely treat him to if he goes with her. The boy's mouth is full of saliva. He hasn't eaten a single crumb since last night. Having accepted the offer, he is ready to go with her, but suddenly stops, because along with the feeling of hunger, doubts arise in his mind about what is happening now, and whether it is really all so simple and safe. Kane thinks that a carriage for a common maid looks suspicious. Usually such carriages are reserved for aristocrats or important people, but here there is only one maid. He thinks that he might be attacked again, since there are not even any guards. At this moment, Kane suddenly realizes that neither Captain Granto, nor the rest of the soldiers who accompanied him, nor his faithful servant Zen are nearby. The boy cannot understand where they have all disappeared to, and why they have left him alone. Therefore, he abruptly refuses the offer he has just been made, under the guise of a fictitious urgent matter. Kane only asks to be shown how to get to the estate, without revealing any details. The girl nods, asking if he can really go alone. However, instead of explaining the way, she asks the guy to wait a bit. The maid runs to the carriage, where the coachman is sitting with a pipe in his mouth. Looking inside, she finds a tattered sheet of paper folded several times and turns back to Kane. Unfolding the sheet, she hands it to the boy. It turns out to be a map, which shows the location of the estate and the point where the young owner is currently located. Kane thanks the girl for such a gesture of kindness and generosity, takes the map, and decides to use it later to get to the desired point himself. This is where their conversation ends. The boy turns and runs back into the forest, wishing her all the best. The girl doesn't even have time to say goodbye. She finds this strange boy incomprehensible, yet well-mannered and polite, which is completely atypical for village children. Finding a large stick to help him walk, Kane begins his ascent up the high mountain, hoping in his mind that Zen might be able to return to camp, along with the rest of the soldiers, if the situation there has finally calmed down. But hunger is making itself felt more and more. The boy hugs his stomach and regrets that he refused the treat. Pictures appear in his head of him drinking tea with that sweet maid and tasting her sweet cakes. Shaking his head sharply, he tries to push aside unnecessary thoughts and focus on the goal, forcing himself to forget about the lost chance to reach the estate in comfort. And suddenly Zen appears before him, all in tears with snot on his face. He cries and sobs, calling for his young master. The boy jumps up in fright, screaming in surprise, and stares at the faithful kobold who suddenly appeared before him. At that very moment, Kane begins to feverishly apologize to Zen for abandoning him and running away on his own. But suddenly, someone's strong hand falls on his shoulder, and the captain's voice is heard from behind. It turns out that he and the soldiers have been looking for the boy all this time. At first, Kane is scared, and then with horror, he notices the blood on his armor and hands. The fighters stand before the young master, their faces and clothes stained with dried blood, but they ask not to worry about them, because the main thing is that he is safe and finally found. The captain perceives everything that happened as a great experience of hard training, which he had long dreamed of. But one of the soldiers looks at him with an incomprehensible look, because there is nothing to be proud of here. Kane even thinks that after the battle, the remnants of common sense have been knocked out of these soldiers. The boy apologizes to his servant once again, gently strokes his head. But Zen does not hold grudges or get angry, understanding perfectly well why the master did what he did. Looking around at all the soldiers, the boy smiles good-naturedly, sincerely glad that they are all alive and have survived a difficult battle. They were very lucky to meet near a mountain pass, and now they are traveling together to the ancestral estate of the Carlier family. The young man changes back into his usual clothes, grumbling discontentedly about why he changed into rags at all. But Zen notes that this image even suits his master very well. Guard Captain Granto bows to Lord Kane, saying that it was because of him that the boy had to go through all these horrors. But the young man is not angry, thanks him for his service, and admits that they have done their duty properly. But Granto doesn't stop. Without raising his head, he says that he won't be able to atone for his sin. The boy stops and asks why it's impossible. There is no answer. Then Kane says that he should be grateful to him, and now the captain will live here and perform the duties of the Lord's personal guard. This is not what the man expected at all. He freezes, looking at the boy, who quickly calms him down, saying that it is just a joke. He does not like this, as does Kane himself. Later, the boy meets the senior butler of the Carlier family, 65-year-old Sebastian Hisman. He bows to the young master and says that they haven't seen each other for a long time. The old man asks if the boy remembers him, and Kane replies that, of course, he remembers Sebastian as the head butler, even though it has been 7 years since they last met. Without delay, the young man gets down to business and says that his father has entrusted him with the management of the lands, so he asks if Sebastian can help him with this difficult task. Nodding in agreement, the butler promises that he will make every effort and help the young master in everything he can. The boy is sincerely happy about these words, adding that he will not stay on these lands for long. He was sent here as a lord to raise profits, and he would be grateful for any support. The old man advises the young gentleman to rest after the journey and discuss all important issues later. Remembering everything he has experienced, Kane agrees, because he wants to at least rest a little and only then decide matters. Smiling, Sebastian points to the estate and invites the young master and kobold Zen to follow him. As soon as he crosses the threshold, Kane forms a clear plan of action in his head. First, rest and regain strength, and then tackle the main problem, collecting taxes. It was in this ancestral estate that grandfather Leopold lived out his last years. But all matters were then decided not here, but in Lynn Garden, where his brother, Count Louis, performed the duties of the master. Unfortunately, the great-uncle is already too old and sick, which is why Kane's father decided to transfer control of the lands to his son so as not to burden the old man. For a normal 10-year-old boy, this task would seem impossible. But no one would guess that in this body is hidden the soul of a 35-year-old man. Kane is confident in himself and knows that he can handle anything. Suddenly, a bright white light shines on him. He squints, covering his eyes with his hand, and hears a voice welcoming him to the estate. Maids appear before him, beautiful girls of different ages, with different hair lengths and colors, but all in the same uniform. Each of them politely greets the young host, and Kane wonders in surprise if all these girls really work here. They are not just servants. Each one is extremely beautiful, and all are smiling, ready to carry out any order of the boy. Most of them look like they're in their 20s, but there are also very young girls among them, 5 or 6 years old. Kane doesn't understand how such a child can work on the Lord's farm. But the little one smiles at him, and he, involuntarily, smiles back. In his mind, the boy even suggests that Leopold Carlier, the legend of these lands, could have been a freak who used alchemy to make his maids younger and more beautiful. The young man is momentarily taken aback by reality, until he is snapped out of his stupor by Zena's loud scream. Kane immediately explains that he was just thinking, and there's no need to worry. And just then, among the crowd of maids who once belonged to his grandfather, he notices a trembling girl. He approaches. Looking closely, Kane recognizes a familiar face. It was the same girl who had offered him a ride to the estate. She is embarrassed and tries to turn away, avoiding the young gentleman's gaze. Sebastian notices the boy's curious and attentive gaze and asks if something is wrong. He answers briefly, "Everything is fine." The old man glances at the trembling maid, who is silent and does not look up, and then simply walks away, believing Kane's words. At this moment, the other girls turn to Eileen, the same familiar maid, and ask what is happening and why the young gentleman is looking at her like that. The girl's cheeks are burning with shame and she cannot find the words. And Kane himself thinks that Eileen had no idea that a ragged boy in rags, smeared in manure, would turn out to be her new master and lord. In the next room, Sebastian asks the young gentleman to wait a moment while he brings all the necessary documents regarding his possessions. The boy had not yet had time to sit down when a butler appeared at the door with a huge stack of papers and books in his hands. Kane looks at him in surprise, and he says that this is only a small part of the mountain of documents he managed to deliver. The young gentleman is even at a loss for words. Looking through all this pile of papers, he realizes that studying them will take a lot of time. Therefore, he asks for a brief explanation of why taxes from these lands have stopped coming to the capital since the fall. Sighing, Sebastian replies that it's better to show everything with your own eyes than to tell a long story, because it will take even more time. He suggests they follow him, and Kane agrees, instructing Xena to also watch carefully at everything the butler shows them. They descend the grand staircase. The boy marvels at how huge the estate is, and Sebastian only agrees with his words. Finally, the three of them approach the massive door of the castle. The boy asks what it is, and the old man explains. It was where the money and property of the Carlier family were kept. Kane asks permission to look inside. Sebastian agrees, removes the lock, and opens the heavy door. And to the young owner's great surprise, the safe turns out to be completely empty. There are cracks in the walls, dust and cobwebs everywhere. The shelves are empty. Not a trace of gold or treasures. The boy can't believe his eyes. Touching the shelves, he wipes off a thick layer of dust and asks Sebastian if this is all a stupid joke. The old man would also have preferred that it turned out to be a joke, but, unfortunately, they were faced with a bitter truth that could not be turned away. Now all that remains of the Carlier family is a debt of 500 million pounds. Kane cannot believe the figure and does not understand how it could have happened. He tries to estimate in his head how much it would be in yen, and asks the old man how the family could have gotten to this point. Sebastian explains that the former lord knew how to make money, but he had no idea how to value money or manage it. The confused boy asks how his grandfather, known by legend, a wise administrator and a man respected by the royal family, could have gotten himself into such enormous debt. The old man smiles bitterly and says that this was precisely the title of legend for the last lord of this house. The former ruler was a famous knight who was the first to come to the aid of the king. He accomplished many feats, suppressed rebellions, and liberated the lands from barbarians. But he could not accept the cynicism of the monarch, who did not shy away from sacrificing the lives of ordinary people for his own purposes. Seeing this cruelty, the grandfather promised himself never to become like him and treated the inhabitants of his own lands as his own children. He exempted people from taxes, paid them out of his own pocket, and in years of famine he opened storehouses and distributed food to the needy. He also built monasteries for orphans and made generous donations. Kane can't believe his ears, but Sebastian continues. Thanks to this, his grandfather became famous even abroad, because merchants flocked to him, selling goods at the lowest prices. The guy clarifies whether his grandfather really spent all his money only on helping his subjects. The old man shakes his head. This is not the whole story. There are other nuances. Because the current head of the family, Nicholas Carlier, demanded huge sums from his father every year. The grandfather felt guilty towards his son, because he had left him at a young age, fulfilling his duty. So he constantly sent money. And Nicola asked for 5 million pounds a year to live in the capital. This became one of the main reasons for the terrible debt and financial collapse of the family. Now Kane doesn't even call him father, but contemptuously calls him Seal. He asks if he really demanded such sums every year, and gets an affirmative answer from Sebastian. It turns out that this grandfather simultaneously paid taxes on behalf of the residents, helped them survive, and at the same time satisfied the insatiable whims of his son, who thoughtlessly spent everything and got into debt. This is exactly how the legendary lord's life ended. This infuriates Kane. He calls it lawlessness and swears that upon returning to the capital, he will definitely hang that Seal. Zen sees that steam is already coming out of the boy's ears and asks him to calm down. Kane quickly comes to his senses, agrees with the servant, and apologizes for his excessive outburst. But he still has one question. Why are all the maids so young and yet so beautiful? Another thought arises in Kane's mind. Are they really just maids, or is there something else behind it? To this, Sebastian only replies that it is better to see once than hear 100 times. Kane and Zen look at each other, not understanding what exactly he means. The boy is about to cross the threshold of the next room, but Sebastian stops his servant. Cain asks what to do next. The old man says that only the Lord can go further, so only Cain himself is allowed to enter. The young man tries to argue, saying he is only a temporary lord, but arguing is useless. In the end, he agrees, because there is simply no other way out. He orders Xena to wait for him in this wing, and the kobold asks the master to be careful, because no one knows what awaits next. Cain narrows his eyes and replies that there are no monsters there. Why should he be afraid? Even if there is something strange and dangerous there, he is not going to die from it. Standing in front of the heavy door, the boy looks around once more, then pushes it hard and freezes at what he sees. The estate seems to be the same, but the place he entered is completely unlike anything he has seen before. The interior shines with purity and luxury. A crystal chandelier hangs from above. Everything is tidy. Heavy curtains are drawn on the windows. It's as if he has stepped into a completely different world. Looking around, the boy concludes that this place looks more like a women's wing. Everything around him really looked like that. And the guess turns out to be correct. 4 girls are sitting at the table, drinking tea, eating sweets, and having a casual conversation, not even noticing the appearance of the young host. But as soon as they noticed him, they immediately became embarrassed and blushed in surprise. Cain wanted to say hello and waved, but the next moment, all the maids run away, and the guy can't figure out what exactly he did wrong. The young gentleman guesses that these girls are the same maids who greeted him at the entrance to the estate, but now they look completely different. Their faces were clearly marked with surprise and embarrassment. Their cheeks were burning with shame, and they all instantly fled as soon as they saw the young lord. Their behavior, revealing dresses, and complete lack of responsibilities, replaced by tea parties, led Cain to believe that he has not found himself in an estate, but in a brothel. Turning around, the boy heads for the exit to ask Sebastian what exactly he had just seen. He shouts at the old man and demands an explanation. In an even and calm tone, the butler replies that all these girls are the young master's real servants. But Cain is not deterred, emphasizing that they do not look like maids at all. The old man advises him to calm down, because this is really the women's wing. It's just that no one informed the girls about his arrival, and the guy saw them in their usual surroundings. However, it all depends on the perspective. The young man feels embarrassed, apologizes to Sebastian, but still needs additional explanations. Then the butler adds that these maids also serve as concubines, and Cain realizes with horror that his suspicions have been confirmed. Lord Leopold, his grandfather, was a legend, a kind and generous man respected by everyone around him. Neighboring lords dreamed of intermarrying with him and sent their most beautiful daughters to his estate as concubines. Because of his position and his unwillingness to create conflicts between the lands, the grandfather could not send the girls back to their homes. As a result, he accepted each of them and allowed them to remain on the estate, regardless of age or the number of maids already present. Sebastian also reminds us that Mr. Nicholas Carlier is seriously ill, and therefore the only chance to produce an heir is Cain. And according to this butler, right now, while he is young, is the right opportunity. Cain shudders at such words, because he is only 10 years old. He is indignant, but the old man asks not to drive the girls away. They would respond to him with devotion. Then the guy directly asks how many concubines live on the estate, and receives the answer, 87. What he hears stuns Cain. He apologizes, says he knows enough now, and asks to be left alone to think about what he saw. He runs through the main facts in his head, a debt of £500 million and 87 concubines. The territory is on the verge of collapse, and in fact the Carlier family is completely bankrupt. The young man recalls how the city of Ubara in Japan owed the government 30 million yen. The debt has not yet been paid, and is scheduled to be closed only in 2027. He thinks about how much work he will have to do here to pay it all off. Zen, the loyal servant, asks if he's really that scared by that number, and Cain explodes, shouting that he's never seen that much money in his life and has no idea what to do now. Kobold is quick to reassure him. There are merchants in the capital who daily handle sums greater than this debt. Zen advises to eat well and rest first, because, as they say, the morning is wiser than the evening. And finally, the servant warns not to create even more enemies and problems, which are already more than enough. Smiling softly, Cain agrees with him. The main thing now is to gain strength to be able to cope with everything. It's already getting dark outside, so he decides to finish sorting things out today and rest so he can start work with new energy tomorrow. During dinner, a guy is surrounded by many girls, offering him chicken or avocado salad. But he only wanted one thing, to eat alone in peace. But one of the maids with golden hair holds a piece of cake on a fork in his face, asking him to open his mouth. He turns away, but on the other side he is met with a spoonful of soup from another girl. At this moment, one of the girls hands the boy a large napkin and, claiming that Kane has gotten dirty, wipes his lips. This causes him incredible shame and embarrassment. All the girls offer him more dishes, asking about his preferences, but the young man, tired of the intrusive attention of the beauties, replies that he is already full and wants to go to his room as soon as possible. In the bathhouse, the boy thinks that all these maids are clinging to him like bees to honey, each of them considering it their duty to approach him. In reality, he only feels discomfort from this. Shrugging his shoulders, Kane realizes that he never really tasted the food properly and couldn't eat properly because of the atmosphere. On the one hand, any other man would be happy to have the company of beauties. But right now, he dreams of only one thing: to be left alone in peace and quiet. The young gentleman feels that he has only become more tired after dinner. Hearing this, the maid escorts him to the bedroom, advising him to finally rest on a soft bed. The kobold servant wishes his young master good night and closes the door, leaving him alone with his long-awaited rest. The only thing he doesn't like is the fancy nightgown with ruffles, long sleeves, and a high collar. But these are all small things. Now the boy can fall onto a huge bed and fall asleep not in a hollow tree, but on a really soft, made-up bed. But even here, he is haunted by thoughts of the huge debt he will have to pay. Even a comfortable bed cannot distract him from these worries. In the silence of the night, as Kane falls into a deep sleep, he hears a soft creaking of the door. Someone enters his bedroom, and the boy, even in his sleep, catches it. Instantly, he reaches under the pillow and pulls out his sword, ready to attack the vulnerable at that moment. Kane immediately realizes that this is not his servant. Zen sleeps in another room and would never enter the chambers without knocking. Most likely it's a peasant seeking revenge for an injustice, or bandits who have dealt with the guards and now quietly made their way inside. But the young man was foresighted. He expected something like this and prepared to fight, but that's when trouble happened. His leg cramps at the most crucial moment, the result of a grueling day and complete fatigue. Under the blanket he feels movement. The enemy has come very close, closer than he could have thought. Kane realizes that it's time to attack. Either now, while the guest is sure he's asleep, or never. A scream came from under the blanket. The boy grabbed the stranger and began to choke him, thinking he was fighting off an attacker. But at the same moment, he understands that the voice belongs to a woman, and his hands have touched not the enemy's body at all, but a woman's breasts. Confused, he hears a muffled sigh. The boy instantly throws the figure to the floor, shines a flashlight on her face, and asks what she needs. His fingers are already radiating electricity, ready to cast a spell. But unexpectedly, it turns out to be a maid. She says she has come to do the night shift. It was Eileen, the same girl he had seen earlier. Sighing heavily, the boy asks if she realizes he's only 10 years old. She nods, and he adds that it's too early to be talking about night services at that age. Eileen replies that if she doesn't do this, she will be ridiculed and punished for her dereliction of duty. She blushes just like Kane, but admits that it's her job. The young man guesses that this is Sebastian's order. He says that he does not need it, and hopes that in time the butler will understand his refusal. The boy asks the maid to return to his wing and promises to talk to Sebastian about the incident later. But suddenly the girl starts to sob, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Kane hastens to assure her that he didn't mean to offend or scare her. His words only increase her sadness. She cries even more, because she was expecting someone else and came to fulfill her service, and the guy rejected her. Now Kane realizes that all the maids in this house live by this order, and the master's refusal only ruins their reputation and humiliates them. He asks the girl to raise her head. She looks at him with teary eyes, holding back tears, and Kane apologizes for pushing her away so rudely, because he didn't know who had entered his room late at night. The young gentleman extends his hand to the girl, says with concern that it is cold at night, and she is sitting on the floor, risking catching a cold. He allows Eileen to sit next to him on the bed. Sitting next to the owner, the girl is still crying, though less. To ease the tension, Kane asks her name and learns that the maid's name is Eileen. The boy guesses why Sebastian sent her. He had been looking at Eileen especially closely this morning, and not at any other girl, so the butler decided to take advantage of this. He asks quietly, patting her on the shoulder, if the other maids know she is in his chambers now. Eileen answers sheepishly that they do. Then the young owner realizes that he can't just kick her out, so he suggests she stay overnight to avoid gossip and suspicion. The bed is huge, so both he and the girl can lie on opposite sides without disturbing each other. However, tears and a slight blush appear in Eileen's eyes again. Kane feels awkward, trying to calm her down until she gradually falls asleep. The guy himself can't close his eyes for long. He doesn't understand what's going on in the head of a girl of that age, because life in this place has clearly distorted their perception. At heart, Kane remains the same grown man he was in his past life. Now he just tries to be sensitive and respectful to Eileen, realizing that he is too young for nights like this. Eileen wakes up first in the morning. She takes off the warm blanket and can't believe she fell asleep next to her young master. Checking her clothes, she is convinced that the night passed peacefully, and this makes the situation even more awkward and uncomfortable for her. For Eileen, it was her first night sharing a bed with a man. But Leopold, Kane's grandfather, was too old for such a relationship, so she had no experience. The girl is upset that she was preparing for one thing, but everything ended differently. Kane himself, unsuspecting, sleeps with an innocent expression on his face. In the morning, Eileen returns to the women's wing, and the other maids immediately bombard her with questions about the night. Linda is particularly interesting, putting her in a mocking position by asking if she had deprived the boy of his virginity. Eileen turns red as a tomato and doesn't know what to say. Her friend Gertrude comes to the rescue, noting that Linda is asking too vulgar questions. Linda immediately counters, saying that Gertrude herself would like to be in Eileen's place, but the girl denies it, blushing even more. Linda doesn't stop and throws new questions. What kind of young gentleman is in bed? Did she make him happy, and whether the process took place? Another maid advises Linda to wash her mouth with soap for such words and insolence. Suddenly, Grace enters the room praising Eileen. She declares that she is simply lucky because she was the first to get into the young master's bed. But now it is the turn of others. The other maids look down on Grace, who has always loved to mock and humiliate. Continuing, she says that Eileen was just lucky with her forms, and real rich concubines should have been the first to sleep with Kane, not some poor girl. These words make Eileen frown, but Grace just laughs, stating that she complimented her body, so why is she unhappy? She adds that there is no need to be conceited, because Kane's affection is a coincidence, nothing more. Scarlett, a girl with the high ponytail, becomes her friend. She says that Grace is simply jealous because the young gentleman has never paid attention to her. To this, Grace's fans respond that they were directly challenged by Kane himself, so they are not going to waste time arguing with the losers. It had been 5 days since Grace and several maids from wealthy families had received an assignment from the young master. Meanwhile, Eileen and her friends are working in the kitchen, washing dishes and putting away cutlery. Gertrude notices that Grace and the girls have not returned to the wing, and this is the first time anyone has disappeared for so long. One of the maids suggests that something bad might have happened to them, as there is no other way to explain their absence. The only way to find out the truth is to ask the young owner himself. The others are not happy about this idea, so Eileen decides to take the responsibility and do it herself. Arriving at Kane's office, the girl immediately learns what happened to those who disappeared 5 days ago. The young man calmly replies that he reduced them. Confused, Eileen asks what this means and whether the missing maids will return to the women's wing of the estate. The guy says he gave Grace and her friends, servants from wealthy families, to merchants in the capital. These words terrify Eileen. She thinks that Kane will betray her too, so she is ready to argue. But the young man shouts sharply, demanding to calm down. He comes closer and asks to listen carefully. Kane shares a secret. Their family's lands are on the verge of bankruptcy. Or rather, they are already bankrupt, although he doesn't say it out loud. To cut costs, he decided to marry Grace and 45 other maids, effectively giving them away in marriage. The maintenance of 87 concubines cost £5 million a year, a figure that shocks Eileen as much as it once did him. Half of that spending was on cosmetics and personal care products, so Kane got rid of the biggest spenders. And by revealing his secret, he automatically made Eileen an accomplice. Now he announces with a smile that he will give the girl even more responsibilities than before. At first, Eileen is confused, but later says that he can rely on her. She will not let him down. The same goes for the kobold Zen. He has long been accustomed to it and immediately agrees to carry out any orders from his master. Now that grandfather Leopold was dead, and Nicholas was seriously ill, most of the concubines were unemployed. So Kane turned to his merchant acquaintances in the capital to ask if they needed brides. The merchants agreed. Girls from the provinces are less picky and more submissive than those who have lived in the capital all their lives. So, in 3 days, Grace and 45 other maids were married to wealthy merchants from the capital. But still, he had 42 maids left, exactly half the previous number. The only girls left on the estate were 15, 16 years old, and one of them was even younger than 10. All of them were almost the same age. The guy understands that he can arrange another reduction, but then the families of these girls will revolt against Carlier and the young lord. It wouldn't be difficult to suppress such a rebellion, but Kane didn't want any more problems considering the ones he already had, and Zen advised against making any more enemies. So the young man puts that thought aside and decides to focus on those who stayed at home and on future earning plans. Now the estate is inhabited by maid's concubines, Sebastian, and several old guards who still serve the young master. But in Kane's opinion, keeping them here is not the best decision, since most of them are already over 50. Captain Granto and 4 other young warriors return to the capital, and his only companion was the former kobold merchant. The boy looks at Zen and notices that his servant's uniform looks completely neglected. He doesn't understand what the host is leading him to, and starts making excuses, saying he didn't have time to change clothes because he didn't have a free minute. Kane has a new idea. He gives Zen a special assignment, which he is ready to do immediately. First, the kobold must go through the entire library, leaving only those books that relate to land management. Everything else can be removed. Then the boy hands over the key to the warehouse. There, among his father's junk, the Carliu family's family belongings are stored. He orders Xena to evaluate each one at her own discretion. Kane adds that he realized back in the capital that the servant's eyes cannot be fooled, so he is completely counting on the kobold. Inspired by trust, Zen asks to rely on him and promises to get down to business immediately. Kane allows it, releasing him to carry out his assignments. Having dealt with the errands, the boy stretched and was about to inspect his possessions, when suddenly a thunderstorm and downpour began outside the window. Opening the heavy doors of the estate with irritation, the young man cursed the unwanted rain that suddenly poured down as if a bucket of water had been spilled. At that moment, Sebastian, the butler, came up from behind and advised the young master not to go out in such a downpour. Kane, upset by the thwarted plans, was forced to agree. The boy shivered from the cold, noting that it was much cooler here than in the capital. The old man covered him with a blanket and sent him to his chambers to warm up. Sitting in a chair by the fireplace, the boy was still shivering and complaining about the weather. Sebastian offered him a hot cup of tea, and Kane readily accepted the offer. The rain did not stop for 10 days, causing terrible damage to Kane's possessions. Dozens of villages were destroyed by the floods, but the warehouse with the autumn harvests suffered the most. It was completely washed away by the water. Looking at the map with the marks of destroyed places, the young man makes a gloomy conclusion. This is a real nightmare. Now he's not just broke. Kane feels like he's in a survival game at its most difficult level. Besides, no one can guarantee his safety. The guy doesn't know when the bandits will attack again. Without funds and with a huge debt, the residents do not trust the new lord, and he does not have any reliable vassals behind him. The situation seemed hopeless, if not for his alchemist abilities, which left a chance for salvation. One of the maids brought a teapot and cups, but Kane refused and ordered him to be left alone. He asked Sebastian and the maid to leave, and they obediently followed the order. The guy understands that he lacks knowledge about his own lands. If he had more information, he could get out of this situation. It would be nice to have something like a territory status screen like in the game. The young man mentally wishes to create such a system, and suddenly he is illuminated by a white glow, causing him to squint, covering his eyes with his hand. As soon as he opens his eyes, he sees a screen with data in front of him. Population, 780,000. People's faith, 37. Personal reputation, 21. Flood protection, 32. Trade, 11. A small elf suddenly sits on his shoulder and says that this is a visualization of the state of the lands of the Carli family. The young man angrily pushes the creature away and asks who it is. But the next moment, the fairy appears on the other shoulder, arms crossed, and angrily declares that she doesn't like that tone. Looking at the tiny girl with wings, Kane sarcastically asks if she's a moth. But he resents his rude words because moths don't talk. At least he could have called her a butterfly. Squinting, the young man asks if she is an insect and orders her to disappear, as he has enough problems as it is. He decides that this is just a delusion. The fairy sighs, covering her face with her hands. She is unhappy because she saved his life and received no gratitude. Kane doesn't believe her words. He doesn't even remember seeing her before. He says with a smile that it's a good joke, but he's definitely not a goddess in front of him. Smiling, the fairy replies, "In fact, she is the mother goddess of these lands, and her name is Opria. Since Kane has become the new lord, she gives him her blessing to take control of the territory." This is the first time the young man has heard of such a goddess, and before he can finish, Opria angrily interrupts him, outraged that he doesn't even remember rescuing her in the forest. A moment comes to mind when, exhausted and unconscious, he was awakened by someone's voice. And now Kane finally remembers. That intrusive voice saved him from bandits in the forest, waking him up at the right moment and saving his life. But even despite this fact, the boy still believes what he heard then was just a verbal hallucination from fatigue, and the voice in the forest was nothing more than a delusion of consciousness. The fairy hears his thoughts and puffs out her cheeks in insult, declaring that she is neither a delusion nor a hallucination. Kane is amazed by her abilities and asks how she managed to read his mind. Smiling, Opria happily reminds him that she is a deity, not someone else. Sighing, the boy realizes that he will not be able to get rid of her so easily, and asks again what she wants. The fairy replies, she wants to see his lands flourish. Realizing the creature's purpose, Cain asks to be rescued from the crisis if she wants to restore the glory of the territories. But the fairy refuses. She has already helped enough. The young man doesn't understand what she means, but Opriya points to the magic screen. It is the gift, because the young man himself wanted to see the visualization of the lands, and she created it especially for him. The young man throws up his hands. The panel will bring neither money nor benefit, so he asks to be given a classic cheat that can make him rich quickly. The fairy quickly disappoints him. She has no such abilities. She can only advise and suggest, which to Cain sounds like useless chatter. Then the boy asks to explain how the panel works. The deity agrees, stands in front of the screen and explains, population is the number of people, a negative balance is the obvious cause of decline. People's faith shows how much the residents trust the Lord. Personal reputation is the residents' attitude towards him. And the security parameter is directly related to the state of security and medicine. Agriculture and trade remain at industrial levels. Cain thinks, these figures are not so low, they could have been worse. For comparison, the fairy gives the example of the southern lands of Barthélemy, where the indicators exceed 80. Against this background, Cain's situation looks pitiful, and he himself understands this. Opriya adds that among all the lands of the Romerai kingdom, its territories are currently at the very bottom of the hierarchy. The boy denies it, saying that there must be even worse lands, and indeed, it is true, which is why the goddess decided to descend here to help develop this land. If the young man tries, his performance will increase, and with it, his well-being. If not, he will slide even lower. In work and development lies the hidden path to prosperity, and then the fairy will be able to raise his status. The deal sounds good, but Cain is hesitant. She speaks convincingly, but she doesn't intend to do anything herself. He's not sure if he should trust her. On the 11th day, the rain finally stopped. It was time to decide what to do next. The young man puts on warmer clothes and heads for the exit. Sebastian stops him and asks where he is going. Cain replies, it's time to explore the lands of Carlier, because too much time has been lost due to the rain. But you can't just go like that. You need a guide. The guy asks the butler if he knows anyone who is well versed in these parts. And then Eileen appears, scared but determined. She says she was born in these lands and is ready to show him everything he needs. Cain agrees and says he trusts her. The girl assures him that she will do whatever is necessary. Sebastian objects. He cannot let Cain go unescorted. But the young man replies that the guards will only attract unwanted attention and could cause a fight. The old man suggests sending people to scout and leave tomorrow. The guy shook his head. No need. He would walk through the lands himself, look around, and assess the situation. The butler refuses and asks to take at least his grandson for safety. The young man agrees, and Sebastian promises to prepare a horse. Cain leaves Zena in charge of the business during his absence. Zena promises to live up to his trust again. Now all that's left is to wait for Eileen. Half an hour later, the boy and the guard were already standing outside, complaining in whispers that the girl was taking too long to get ready. Finally, Eileen came running in, apologizing for being late. She was wearing a warm fur dress, a hood with pom-poms, fur earmuffs, and mittens. Cain is embarrassed by her appearance. The girl seems extremely beautiful to him. Stammering, he says that he is also ready to go, and approaches the horse. The boy looks at the groom holding the animal. He is wearing a light shirt, a belt around his waist, leather gloves, and simple pants. Looking more closely, Cain asks who this man is. Only then does he realize that it is the stableman himself standing before him. The guy praises him for his excellent work. The guy smiles back and wishes him a nice day. Cain apologizes for the distraction but asks where Sebastian's grandson, whom he was supposed to accompany, is. The man laughs loudly and says that it is he, Joff, Sebastian's grandson. He works as a groom, and this news amazes Cain because this is not at all how he imagined the grandson of a butler. Sebastian said his grandson was one of the youngest guards on the estate, but in Cain's eyes, 30-year-old Joff Heisman looked more like a gorilla than a personal bodyguard. Examining the man's physique, the boy notes his strong muscles and thinks that he may be much more capable than the old knights who have already lost their strength. At this moment, Joff turns to the maid and asks if she has come to see off the young gentleman, but the girl actively waves her hands, explaining that she is going with him. Without giving them anything to object, Joff grabs Cain and Eileen by the scruff of the neck and, wishing them a pleasant journey, announces that they are already on their way. To the boy's surprise, the groom throws them into the air, and they land not on the ground, but directly on the horse. Both the boy and the girl tremble, realizing that something is wrong, and they would have crashed on the spot. The man admits that he mostly looks after the garden, takes care of the trees and plants, so it's hard to call him a groom. Kane asks, is he both a security guard and a gardener at the same time? He replies that there are no conflicts, so there is enough time. The guy is worried about another question. Will Joff freeze important parts of his body in this state? But he just smiles, saying that as long as he moves, nothing will happen to him. The horse starts, and Joff orders him to hold onto the saddle so he doesn't fly off the road. Even these words scare Kane after his recent flight. But suddenly the guy feels something soft and warm in his neck, not understanding what it is. It all becomes clear when Eileen apologizes in a shaky voice. She rarely rides and doesn't know how to sit properly so as not to get in his way. On the one hand, Kane doesn't mind feeling this softness and warmth. But on the other hand, the maid's movements make his face pale and even scream with shame. He's only 10 in this world, but inside he's a grown man, and the situation is worrying him too much. The boy asks Eileen to take her hands off his face because he can't see anything. The girl immediately apologizes and lets him go, and he tries to convince both her and himself that everything is okay, although his words don't sound very confident. Watching this, Joff laughs, but remains silent. Embarrassed, Kane takes the girl's hands and places them on her chest to hold them. She obediently agrees. But no matter how hard she holds on, the guy still feels the softness of her body. And there's nothing he can do about it. If you look at it from the side, forgetting about the adult soul in the child's body, they look more like a mother and son riding horses. There is nothing seductive about that. Meanwhile, the horse and riders pass a figure in tattered rags, who stares intently straight at Kane. This cold gaze sends shivers through the boy. It's already freezing outside, and the stranger stands in rags, covered in dirt, like a ghost. Then the young man notices another man with firewood in his hands, his face filled with discontent. This is not surprising. The peasants are in rags, thin as skeletons, while he himself is in warm clothes and clearly not hungry. Gritting his teeth, Kane realizes how wrong he was. The entire district is holding on for dear life. A village appears before him, with wooden huts, cracked walls, and roofs with holes. Boards and logs are scattered around. The area looks desolate and frightened. With pursed lips, Kane orders them to stop and turn back. Joff looks on in surprise, as they have only just arrived. Eileen asks why the sudden change of heart, but he only apologizes. The girl still wants to understand why they are leaving without even visiting the village. Kane's gaze darkens, and he confesses. He wanted to see reality with his own eyes. He explains that even this village is already showing the catastrophic effects of the long rains, and he is sure that the rest of the villages are in the same condition. So it's pointless to waste time visiting each one individually only to see the same picture again. It's better to go back and start taking action immediately. After listening to him, Eileen gently strokes his hair and tells him that he is very kind. Such words and actions can melt any woman's heart. But she immediately removes her hand, remembering that she is not just a friend, but Lord Carlier. She apologizes for the freedom, but Kane only smiles. He is not angry. Returning to the estate, the young man exclaims that he needs money. Otherwise, there is no way. But for it to appear, something must be done. The trouble is that there is nothing in the estate and in the lands. The only place he can get them is through orders, so Kane decides it's time to take the first step. Calling his butler Sebastian to his office, Kane orders that no one enter the office, as he will be busy compiling documents and does not want to be distracted. The young man adds that he will also need the help of the kobold servant Zen, who is currently in the library. After listening to the master's order, Sebastian bows and promises to carry out the assignment. When Zen arrives, the boy asks to bring a complete collection of laws, and from then on, the exhausting work on the documents begins, which will last for many hours. Dipping his pen into the ink, Kane leans thoughtfully over the sheets. A new idea is brewing in his head that could help him cope with this difficult task. There is a timid knock on the door. The boy lets him in and sees the maid Eileen on the threshold, who apologizes for bothering him but brings him hot tea. Without looking up from his tome of laws, Kane thanks the girl for her concern, but decides to put off the drink until later, because he needs full concentration right now, so he asks her not to distract him. Then the girl asks if he can help with something or run even a small errand, but the guy answers in the negative, letting her rest. Frowning, Eileen offers to at least just be there to support the gentleman, since there is nothing else she can do. She intertwines her fingers, waiting for his consent. After a few seconds of silence, Kane lets her stay and let her do whatever she wants, as long as she doesn't disturb him. The girl nods, promising not to distract him. Time passes imperceptibly, and the boy doesn't even notice how the evening turns into night while he is immersed in papers. Eventually, he lays his head on the table and slowly falls asleep, holding a quill in his hand, ink dripping from it, and even saliva dripping onto the tabletop, which the maid notices. Eileen gently touches his shoulder, calling his name, but the boy doesn't respond. Then the girl decides not to bother him anymore, realizing how exhausted he is. He wakes up a few hours later, realizing that he is no longer lying on the hard surface of the table, and the pen has disappeared from his hand. Now he is resting on something soft. Raising his head, the boy almost falls over when he sees Eileen dozing next to him. It dawns on him that he fell asleep on her lap, and the girl had arranged his sleep that way on purpose. The young man feels as if he is wrapped in something warm and fragrant, which makes his soul feel much calmer, as if there are no problems around him at all. Kane thinks that he remains an old man at heart, and Eileen, at 15, shows excessive maternal instincts towards him, which seems strange to him, although perhaps the fact is that he is now only a 10-year-old boy. There is something ambiguous about this. But despite his remorse, he allows himself to lie down for a moment longer, putting aside the documents. The next night, Kane, Joff, and Eileen head to the capital to get there in the morning and avoid attracting too much attention from the bandits. Sebastian was against the idea, but the groom and maid assured him that they would leave so quickly and quietly that no robber would have time to intercept them. Standing by the carriage ready to depart, Eileen anxiously says that she also wants to go to the capital because she is very worried. Kane sternly replies that this is not entertainment, but a journey for money for the land, but allows her to accompany him. As planned, the carriage stops early in the morning near the capital of the kingdom of Ramri, and the guests are greeted by majestic stone walls and towers. Eileen looks around in amazement, saying that she imagined the capital to be completely different. The guide is surprised by her reaction, and Joff admits that it is his first time here, as is the maid. There are many people around in beautiful clothes. Girls in long dresses, men in camisoles and shirts. Eileen is surprised, asking if it is not a holiday today. Otherwise, why are there such crowds here? Kane replies that it's always like that in the capital. There's a lot of movement of both money and people. Therefore, he should immediately submit the documents to the appropriate place. But he doesn't have time to finish because he crashes into a huge thug, hits him with his forehead and falls to the ground. The thug immediately yells and orders him to watch where he's going. The big guy looms over the boy, demanding an apology, because one should apologize to elders. Kane finds himself in a mess, because just a moment ago, everything was fine. Rising to his feet, the young man assesses both the situation and his opponent. He is even bigger than Joff, and the boy did not expect such a threat. He looks at the groom, who immediately understands the hint. Joff looks from the young gentleman to the rude man, who is hurling insults and demanding a fight, thinking that the boy is afraid and the guard will not intervene. But Eileen instantly takes the initiative, apologizes on behalf of her younger brother, explaining that he didn't mean to offend anyone. Kane doesn't have time to say a word. The bandit sneers mockingly, carefully examining the girl, and admits that at least one of them is smart. He approaches Eileen, brazenly offering to forget the incident if she will keep him company that evening. The girl turns pale and hides behind Kane, trembling with fear. Eileen, in despair, asks what to do now, and immediately apologizes, assuring that she does not agree to such an insult. Kane sighs heavily. He wanted to avoid a fight, but now there is no choice. The boy turns to his guard, ordering him to deal with the brazen man. This further angers the thug, who swings his fist, promising to teach the kid a lesson. But it turned out differently. Joff quickly twisted the thug's arm, causing him to howl in pain and try in vain to break free. In a calm tone, he warned, "Don't touch the young gentleman again." A stream of curses and pleading cries burst from the thug's mouth. Only then does Joff release him, muttering that he's gone a little too far. Eileen watches the scene in astonishment. With a disdainful snort, Joff declares that the city boys are too weak. Kane asks why the guard didn't intervene immediately. The guard explains that he didn't have an order, so he waited, hoping that the young gentleman would handle it himself. Ashamed, the boy apologizes and admits that he underestimated the guard for no reason. Sebastian was right to advise his grandson. Hearing the mention of his grandfather, Joff smiles and remembers the past. It turns out that even now he has not yet surpassed old Sebastian. The butler at his age is not at all inferior in strength to his younger relative. Meanwhile, the royal knights rush to the square. Seeing the aftermath of the battle, they begin to question witnesses. Kane calmly recounts the events from beginning to end. One of the knights bows, acknowledging that he understands everything. From now on, the matter is in the hands of the guards, and they themselves will punish the offender. Finally, Kane and his companions can continue their journey. The boy points the way, and Eileen and Joff follow. The maid asks if they really came to negotiate with the merchants of the capital. A short nod from the young gentleman confirms her guess. That is precisely why they have traveled all night. But the boy explains, trade on their lands is currently hopeless. Due to high taxes, it will only be possible to restore it in 10 years, if not more. Eileen recalls rumors about the sharp eye of the capital's merchants and worries. What to do if they already know everything about the decline of the Carlier estates? Kane replies that it is, but he wasn't going to pay these merchants. The girl wonders, what is this about then? According to the guy's plan, he will receive the money from them for free, as donations from the Merchants Guild. Eileen can't believe her ears. How is this possible? Why should the guild help when their lands are completely indifferent to them? Kane admits that it sounds complicated, but he wouldn't have come here without a well-thought-out plan. And then the girl understands. This is exactly why he spent so long compiling the documents. This is the secret. The guy doesn't even hide the truth when suddenly a loud exclamation pierces the square. Standard bearers with coats of arms appear before the people, accompanying a luxurious carriage that rushes towards the castle. Kane guesses. This must be a carriage to the royal castle. 8 white horses pull a huge carriage bearing the coat of arms of a noble family, the wealthiest in the capital. These trading houses have connections with the royal family and supply them with luxury goods. And as he explains this to his companions, a brilliant plan is brewing in his head. The next moment the boy disappears. Eileen and Joff don't even have time to notice it. They only hear the screams of the crowd, begging them to stop the madman, otherwise he will be hit by a carriage. Looking back, the girl and the guard realize where Kane has gone. And now their guest doesn't seem so crazy anymore. The young man runs towards the white horses, reaching out his hand to try to stop them. It's madness, but he doesn't even think about backing down. The carriage flies past, but the boy is nowhere to be seen. Tears shine in Eileen's eyes. She is convinced that the gentleman is dead. After all, it is impossible to survive after such a thing. The crowd gathers around, discussing what they have seen. Some assume that the boy was thrown far to the side. Others think that he was crushed by the wheels. Joff orders Eileen to stay in the square, while he rushes after the carriage to find the body of the young master. And just then, a familiar voice rings out. Kane calls out to his companions, and Eileen looks around hopefully, trying to figure out where the sound is coming from. Suddenly, a child's hand appears from under the ground. Everyone finally understands. The boy is alive. He used his alchemy to save himself from inevitable death. Kane, chuckling smugly, mutters that he would have been gone in a moment, but fortunately, everything worked out, and only now does it become clear why he committed this crazy act. A boy emerges from his ground, holding a black cat in his arms. He touches its nose with his finger, muttering that it almost turned into minced meat under the wheels of the carriage and the hooves of the horses. Kane is relieved that he managed to save the little creature, and jokingly adds, now the so-called Lord Meow should be eternally grateful to him, even posthumously. But the rescued cat does not share this enthusiasm at all. It hisses angrily, breaks free from his hands, and jumping out runs away. The guy tries to explain that his lightning is just alchemy, and he did not want any harm, but the animal does not listen. Upset that he risked his life for the cat, the boy sits down on the ground and concludes that cats are heartless creatures. At that moment, Joff runs up to him, loudly calling his name. Kane's legs lift off the ground. The guard picks him up, shakes him, and at the same time asks if he's hurt. The boy even hiccups in surprise and, waving his arms, asks to be put down. He assures him that everything is fine and there is nothing to worry about, so he asks Joff not to worry and to let him go. Behind him stands Eileen, in tears, still not believing that her master is alive. She asks in a trembling voice if he really threw himself under the wheels just for the cat. With a smile, the boy confirms. Yes, he saw the kitten right in the path of the carriage. Joff wipes the sweat from his forehead and admits that he didn't even have time to notice how it all happened. Kane proudly says, since he has been given such power of alchemy, why not save at least one life? Here Eileen bursts into even more bitter tears, her face turning red. She covers him with her hands. The boy asks confusedly why she's crying, because everything is fine. The girl tearfully asks him to never do that again. Kane gently assures her that he will not put her life in danger. In fact, he understands that it is impossible to promise such a thing, but he only says it to calm the maid, because he cannot stand her tears. Later, all three enter the restaurant. Joff apologizes guiltily for not being able to help in time, and Eileen also chides herself. The guy replies that everything is fine with him and there was no need to worry. Eileen admits that her heart is still beating wildly, but she is happy that he is okay. Raising a mug of tea to his lips, Kane suggests a break. The establishment they are in only accepts aristocrats, so no one will eavesdrop on the conversation. If you have any questions, you can ask them here. Eileen clarifies one thing right away. She reminds me, the guy said he would ask for donations from the Merchants Guild. But how is that possible and where to start? Kane apologizes for not explaining earlier. Before going to the guild, he wants to meet with important people who will help legalize the documents. He says he will go to the law office with Eileen and Yoff to file a tax return. The girl doesn't understand anything. Some kind of declaration. Advice. These are all strange words for her. The guy explains, merchants will never give money just like that, but if the guild officially issues land grants to the Carlier family, then it's a different matter. Therefore, it is necessary to achieve a reduction in taxes for the next 10 years. This will give time to develop the lands and make agreements with the guild. Eileen asks if it will take a long time. Kane agrees, yes, it is not easy. However, he has a few ideas. The main thing is not to rush. Therefore, they will stay in the capital for a few days. And this news is quite pleasing to his companions. The next day, Kane heads to the Ramres Kingdom Law College. It's a grand building with long staircases, columns, and a dome. And on the columns are statues of owls. Eileen looks around in fascination, wondering if this is really the same college. Approaching the counter, the guy hands the girl a document with a government stamp and gives his name, noting that he has an appointment. Seeing Carlier's seal, the girl believes him and asks to wait in the guest room until they are called. Joff notes that the building is very spacious. Kane explains that only nobles are allowed in here, and not everyone, so there are not many people here. Opening the door, this boy enters a room with soft sofas and a carpet, deciding that it is a great place to wait. Sitting on the couch, Joff nods, and Eileen begins a conversation with the young gentleman. She has been holding back her anxiety for a long time and finally dares to ask the question that worries her. Eileen hesitantly admits that she feels out of place in this place, and the guy immediately understands her. The grandeur and importance of the college really makes the girl feel like an outsider. Kane finds words to support him. It would be too boring here without her, and there is a pleasant and interesting company nearby. If it weren't for the maid nearby, the guy wouldn't have anyone to even talk to. He would have fallen asleep, like Joff, whom Kane looks at with displeasure. Eileen laughs gently and says that the man spent the night driving the carriage, so he should be more lenient. The young man agrees. Joff has done his duty and has the right to rest. Kane himself is afraid to even imagine how Sebastian would react if he saw his grandson snoring on the couch instead of protecting his master. The words about the butler for some reason really scare the girl. She asks not to bring up the topic, and the guy wonders why everyone around him reacts like that when he mentions Sebastian. Eileen bites her nails from nerves and looks away, and the guy concludes that there are topics that are better not to touch. Her gaze suddenly stops to the side and Kane tries to understand what she is looking at. The girl says she has seen this cat before, and the boy remembers that it is Lord Meow, whom he saved from the wheels of a carriage. He praises Eileen for her observation, but she just brushes it off. The kitten stood out against the white columns. It was hard not to notice. The kitten stares intently at the guests, but doesn't dare go inside, and the boy doesn't understand why. Eileen slaps her knees and calls him over, afraid that some rich man will notice the animal and throw it away, which would be terribly unfortunate. The cat approaches. The girl strokes it behind its ear and under its chin. A completely different picture forms in Kane's head. He imagines how beautiful they would look together with Eileen and this kitten, like a real family. Shaking his head, the boy dismisses unnecessary thoughts. He is here on a serious matter, and Eileen is still only a 15-year-old girl. Suddenly, the kitten runs away, and Kane thinks it was just looking for a way out, but Eileen denies it. She believes the cat has come to thank the young man for saving her, but is simply too shy to approach. Kane thinks it's a children's story. Time passes, they wait a long time. Finally, Joff wakes up and stretches. A few minutes later, a gloomy man in a hood enters the room and announces that the young lord is already waiting, ordering him to follow him. Kane only sighs. If the money weren't so needed, he wouldn't waste time waiting. Seeing that the companions have started following Kane, the man stops them. The guards are not allowed into the office. The guy reassures Joff, "Let him wait here, nothing bad will happen." Following the gloomy guide in silence, Kane and Eileen don't even look at each other. He points to the open door, inviting them to enter. And it is there that the young man again sees the same kitten, rescued in the square, which now seems to have come to thank him. He doesn't understand why it's here, because it ran away in the other direction. Maybe it really felt affection for him? In the office, the advisor to the kingdom of Ramres awaits the boy. His fingers are studded with rings. He wears an owl hat, and his face radiates hostility. He asks dryly what brought the heir to Carlier to college. Kane begins to explain that he wants to apply for a tax reduction thanks to donations from the Merchants Guild, citing the third paragraph of Article 24 of the Commercial Law. But the counselor barely listens, limiting himself to nodding. The guy can barely contain his indignation. This fat hunk doesn't even hear his words. The advisor replies that he will help, but wonders what he will get in return. Gritting his teeth and fists, Kane realizes that corruption is rampant in the kingdom, and he himself has encountered it at the worst possible moment. Eileen holds a bag of gold. The boy orders it to be given to the advisor. A small amount, but still it is payment for the time spent. He chuckles and praises the young man. They say, despite his age, he understands well how everything works. But he adds, this is only enough for fun with colleagues, and to assemble a working group for at least 3 days, much more will be needed. Kane is seething with rage. He gave £100,000, and it was called a little thing. The advisor explains that he and his colleagues only go to the most prestigious institutions, so perhaps only some junior officials will agree to help. It would seem that he even feigns sympathy, saying that the Carlier family is not that poor. But in reality, this small donation will not satisfy anyone. And then the advisor suggests another option that, in his opinion, will satisfy everyone. The advisor brazenly suggests a simple option. Loan him the girl standing next to the young lord for just a few nights. At these words, Eileen trembles and lowers her eyes to the floor. Kane's eyebrows knit together. He is filled with rage. He doesn't even want to think about someone mocking his maid like she's a toy. In his mind, he's ready to chop up the fat bastard and throw the pieces to the fish. But in reality, he cannot do this. The young man is not going to break off the negotiations or, even more so, agree to such vile things. Kane tries to find another approach, but the advisor interrupts him, manipulatively pressing. He says he doesn't believe the young lord would refuse such a little thing. The guy sharply replies that Eileen is his confidant who knows everything about the family. However, the counselor smiles skeptically, wondering if the girl can really be trusted with such a job. He openly hints that he does not believe in the young maid's ability to perform such duties, knowing full well the decline of the Carlier lands. And then the unexpected happens. Eileen herself comes forward and agrees to the advisor's conditions, which shocks Kane. Smiling through tears, she says, only Mr. Kane can save these lands, and if her small sacrifice will help him, she is ready. The advisor rubs his hands together with pleasure, his eyes burning with demons. He brazenly declares that it is not for nothing that this girl serves the young lord. She grasps everything at a glance. He hints at discussing her abilities in his chambers. Breathless with lustful thoughts, the man calls Eileen closer. She takes timid steps, flinching at his every move. At that moment, Kane realizes that enough is enough. He will never allow anyone to touch his maid. But suddenly a woman's voice echoes through the hall. It calls the counselor a pig, and forbids him from committing any lawlessness within the walls of the college. The counselor's eyes widen with fear. He recognizes this figure. A woman in a dress and a pointed hat enters through a broken door, through a cloud of dust. She says that the pig is unlucky, because today is the boy's lucky day. The advisor, with fiery frustration, demands, what did the court sorceress Marin Roof neglect? She responds that the gossip about his misconduct with the children had also come to her attention, and she couldn't ignore it. She angrily exposes the advisor. He wanted to rob the guy to the bone, to take the last of the gold from those who had already come for help. The counselor tries to justify himself, saying that the council wouldn't survive without donations. The sorceress resolutely declares, the kingdom will not allow such a disgrace. For such actions, the man will not be rich, but only hanged. The depressed counselor admits, yes, she is a court sorceress and a mentor to magicians of a special order. But this does not give her the right to interfere in the affairs of the college. Marin just laughs at his excuses. He babbles that he is accountable only to Mr. Richard, who is capable of becoming Minister of Labor. The sorceress asks with irony, is the minister really more terrible than the princess, who fiercely hates abuse and debauchery? Kane notices with horror how the advisor turns pale, and sweat runs down his forehead. Eileen quietly asks who this woman is, and the boy explains. Marin comes from an ancient line of magicians who serve the crown, and everyone among the nobility knows her. The sorceress thunders again. If the advisor does not immediately fall to his knees and ask for forgiveness, he will not see an easy death. She promises to report to Princess Octavia, whom she serves, and who detests such vile people. The words work. The counselor falls to his knees, begging for mercy. He crawls to Marin's feet, his voice trembling, and she only smiles contemptuously. The sorceress mockingly asks if he is really asking for mercy, and demands that he confess how many more innocent victims he has broken. At the same time, she digs her heel into his body. The man swears he'll never do that again. But for Marin, apologies alone aren't enough. They don't change anything. At her call, a black cat, Lord Meow himself, enters the hall. He approaches the counselor, his sharp claws showing. The cat scratches the man's face and he screams in pain, begging for it to stop. But the sorceress only encourages the cat. She says there are still many clean places left. The animal tears his skin even harder, until a guard bursts into the office, asking what's going on here. With a completely calm expression, Marin says, "Look, Noir caught a corrupt official red-handed, and now the sentence is being carried out right now." None of the guards protest. Mrs. Marin's presence is enough to convince them of the counselor's guilt. This shocks both Kane and the confused Eileen. Meanwhile, the sorceress asks for a pen and paper. The guards immediately carry out the order, and a moment later a blank sheet appears in the girl's hands, which she examines carefully. Placing it on the unconscious advisor's back, Marin demands a signature, but realizing that he has already served his time, orders him to be taken out of the office. The captain of the guard places his hand to his temple in salute. At his signal, the soldiers carry the counselor away on a stretcher. The sorceress instructs them to decide the scoundrel's fate. Only then does Marin wave to Kane. A black cat has perched comfortably on her hat. The girl says that all this should be considered Noir's gratitude, and she has only fulfilled the will of her little friend. The young man is stunned to realize. That day he accidentally saved Marin's favorite. She hands him a document, a reward for saving him. Kane is overcome with joy. He never expected to get the necessary papers so easily. Yet he maintains his dignity. As befits an aristocrat, he bows and thanks Miss Roof, trying to formally introduce himself, but Marin brushes him off, considering all these formalities unnecessary. She lifts his chin and says that she knows perfectly well who is in front of her. The eldest son of the Carlier house, young Kane, who saved her friend from the wheels of the Nose's carriage. The boy wanted to object, but the sorceress was convinced. The young lord had already shown himself to be diligent and courageous, and that was enough. At the same time, Marin smiles slyly and hints that he took the risk not only for the cat, but also for this sweet girl, and points to Eileen. Kane is embarrassed, unable to find the words. In the end, he admits that it is useless to hide something from Marin's eyes. She gives him the folded document, but he cannot find the words to thank her. The boy asks if Noir is really her friend. Marin nods, adding that the cat is too shy to approach him alone. Kane saved his life, and Noir is sincerely grateful, but because of his nature, he never dared to thank him directly. So Eileen's words about the animal's modesty turned out to be true. Marin says it's the first time he's seen a cat so friendly, and jokes that he's taken a liking to little Kane. Noir meows happily in response. The young man thanks her for the kind words, but unexpectedly hears a strange proposal from the sorceress. Does he want to meet her? Kane is devastated, explaining that he is too young for such things. Marin laughs and says she was joking. He has a seriousness that is not typical of children, and it impresses her. Taking out her pocket watch, the girl realizes that time is running out. As a farewell, she suggests that they have dinner together when the opportunity arises. The young man readily agrees. She reassures him, "Don't worry about that pig. I'll make sure he answers for everything." Hugging Noir, Marin adds that she has not yet fully thanked him for his rescue, so she allows him to contact the palace if necessary, and she will help. The young man doesn't even have time to blink an eye when the sorceress disappears. The events have ended faster than he expected, and it's time to move on. In the square, Eileen notes with surprise. Kane managed to impress such an incredible woman. This does not surprise her. He always behaves like a real master. The guy blushes, thinking that there is nothing special here. Now their goal is to wake Jeff up and head to the Merchants Guild of the Kingdom of Ramres. They are met at the building by Merchant Randolph, whom Kane already knew. He reprimands them that it would have been better to write in advance, then he could have provided an escort. The young man greets him in a hall full of guests and merchants, and immediately announces that he has come with interesting offers. Randolph smiles. The young lord knows how to intrigue. He had once treated Kane like a child, but now he sensed his seriousness and intentions. Such confidence was not surprising. The young man from the Carlier house could not have arrived without a good reason. Although it is late, the merchant congratulates him on his new title and, on behalf of his colleagues, expresses his gratitude for yesterday's acquaintance with the ladies from the estate. He even prepared small gifts. Kane politely receives them, sincerely thanking Randolph for his attention. Sitting down at the negotiating table, the young man doesn't engage in long conversations. Both he and Randolph are busy people. It's time to get to the point right away. The guy states bluntly, the lands of Carlier are in dire need of funds, and he has come to receive a donation from the Merchants Guild. But Randolph only sighs. This proposal sounds too frivolous. After all, the harvest and taxes for 10 years in advance are already pledged to the merchants, and it would be unwise for the guild to support the lord financially. The young man immediately explains that he is not going to cooperate. His goal is to take as much money as possible. But the merchant doesn't understand, because although he is a friend of the young lord, He is first and foremost a merchant who will not give away capital for nothing. The guy denies it. He won't demand anything for nothing. He calls Eileen, takes a scroll from her, and hands it to his husband. He unfolds the document, a tax reduction agreement, signed by an advisor and even a court mage. Kane proposes to transfer the funds that have so far been eaten up by bribe takers in the capital to the needy, while Randolph will keep the benefit. The merchant admits, the idea is clever, but the amounts are sky-high even for donations. He asks for a day to consult with his colleagues and promises an answer. The young man nods, stating that he relies on him. The boy gets up, saying it's time to go, but Randolph sadly asks to stay for at least a cup of tea. Kane declines. Time is money. He thanks for the attention and will wait for news. As he leaves the guild, the young man sees a merchant's carriage with gifts and decides to take advantage of it. On the way, Eileen asks if he is sure of the outcome. The guy asks not to worry. According to the agreement, Randolph is obliged to pay, and for him it is more profitable. It's been a tough day, and even the mighty Jeff looks tired, exhausted from a sleepless night. Suddenly, Eileen offers the Lord to rest on her lap, and Kane does not refuse. He awkwardly apologizes, but the girl only smiles. Eventually, the guy relaxes on her soft lap and falls asleep, no longer noticing the swaying and discomfort. The next morning, when they have returned to the estate, Eileen enters the chambers and greets the master. He looks exhausted, but assures her that everything is fine. Kane announces his goal, to pay off the gigantic debt in 3 years. Otherwise, the Carlier family will be eaten up not only by the debt, but also by the interest. Today, he awaits good news from the Chamber of Commerce, and determination burns in his eyes. The girl reminds him that confidence should come with rest. She worries that he won't get too exhausted. She puts food and tea on the table. She says that if he eats his fill, he will grow faster. But the boy doubts it. Growth does not depend on appetite. Thoughts race through Eileen's head. What will he be like with his bride? If he stays short, he'll be a problem. The Lord frowns. Why is this so important? But, remembering that women don't like short men, he takes a bite of a huge piece of bread, dreaming of outgrowing even his grandfather. The girl tries to stop his haste, but he just asks to be quiet and bites into the meat along with the loaf. She is scared. She could choke. So she bends down with a napkin and wipes the guy's face, which is dirty from a hasty lunch. After looking closely, she offers to help him get himself in order. After a hearty meal, Eileen carefully combs his disheveled hair. The boy mumbles that he is tired and no longer resists. But he accidentally touches her breast and recoils. The girl, confused, asks not to twitch, not understanding what she did wrong. The young man's gaze involuntarily lingers on her. When he's done, he admits that he wants to take a nap. Eileen gently says that something good will definitely happen after he sleeps. The guy lies down on her lap, closes his eyes, feeling gentle touches on his back. And the girl's words come true. A few hours later, Randolph brings a large donation by carriage. Inside are suitcases with locked chests of money. Eileen is happy because these funds will save the villagers. Everything is going according to Kane's plan. The young man looks at his maid and says that the reason for his success is not only his confidence, but also the logical outcome of all events. Eileen doesn't understand what he's talking about, so the guy explains that this money came from his plan, which he started even before arriving in the capital with the documents. Randolph aspires to become head of the Merchant Guild, but his rival is a veteran with 30 years of experience, so winning the position is not easy. Then Kane figured out how to help his friend and change the course of events. If you make Randolph a hero who donates money for the benefit of the villagers, his fame will instantly increase, and his chances of becoming the head of the guild will increase significantly. And Grace and the other maids he had married off to influential people in the capital would spread the word among the merchants. Kane had already instructed Jeff to tell them the good news himself. Eileen asks if the girls really left the estate to save Carlier's lands, but the young man denies it. They were concerned about their own comfort, and he ensured it. In return, they will do a small favor. Kane deliberately placed the Randolph family crest on the donation carriage, and within a moment the entire royal court was buzzing about the benevolent merchant. When night fell, Randolph sat in his chair with a glass of wine, thinking that from now on the young gentleman would be difficult to perceive as a child. He only fulfilled the terms of the deal, but now he also owes Kane a debt, and it is in his interest to make the boy a merchant capable of influencing the entire economy of the kingdom. That same day, a new carriage arrived from the capital, this time with warm clothes and food for the peasants to survive the winter. Watching with Eileen how people receive food and clothing, the boy realizes that this is just the first step towards a new future. A crystal appears in the maid's hands, which she hands to the master. The boy looks at it, asking what it is. Eileen says it's a gift from her younger sister, who once found it and was fascinated by the sparkle. Then the girl gave the stone to her sister, because she considered it as beautiful as Eileen herself. Memories hurt her heart. Her younger sister died of starvation 5 years ago. However, the maid tries not to wallow in sadness because now Mr. Kane is nearby. The guy thinks, if he had been here earlier, he could have saved that girl. But the past cannot be changed. We need to work on the present. Suddenly, the goddess Oprah appears before the young lord. The boy grimaces and calls her a moth again. He mutters that she never appeared in the capital, and now she comes to everything ready. The fairy explains offendedly. He did not invite her, and his attitude towards the goddess distances his land from divine grace. She adds that she remains the mother guardian of these lands, and, perhaps, it is easier for him to consider her a bride waiting for her husband from the campaign. And she hints that because of his rudeness, the statistics may drop sharply. Realizing his mistake, Kane hastily apologizes, begs for leniency, and asks for forgiveness. Oprah sighs. It's always difficult with this young lord. To distract her, the boy asks if she has any good news, but the fairy says she has the right to visit without reason. To avoid long speeches, he asks to see a screen with statistics. Seeing it, the guy is surprised. The population has doubled, but where did such an influx come from? Fea explains. People in the capital learned about free donations and moved here. Reputation and medicine have both grown, but other indicators remain low. Trade and crafts have ground to a halt due to the flood and winter, so in the spring they will have to work hard to restore the economy. But the debt has not yet decreased. The fairy assures her that everything will gradually level out. The main thing is not to give up. The guy angrily asks her to at least write off the debt, but she only teases him with her tongue. It's beyond her control. Thus passed the winter that Kane had dreaded. He turned 11, but his debt remained the same. 500 billion yen in terms of currency. The young man became even more worried. The faithful servant Zen enters the office, announcing the request of the village of Jindi to resolve the conflict, and only the young master can do it. Kane angrily asks why he needs this. Isn't there an elder in the village? But the kobold replies, there is, but people only trust their lord. The young man grumbles. The residents always call him, and the gratitude is the same. Every time they give him some beauty from the village. Then Kane orders the butler Sebastian to be brought in to consult about the peasants' debts. The old man enters, bows, and asks what the gentleman wants. The young man immediately gets down to business. The documents indicate that Carliu's grandfather lent money to the peasants. Can he now collect gold from them? The old man immediately frowns and says that it is impossible to repay the debts now for certain reasons. The boy thinks for a moment, then announces that it's time to welcome the new year, and, with it, destroy all those meaningless debt notes. He orders Sebastian to gather all the maids on the estate. Kane orders taxes to be collected from the wealthiest inhabitants of the territories and used to buy plenty of food, wine, and several carcasses of cattle. One of the maids tries to understand what he is trying to achieve by forcing the girls to cut meat. But Eileen explains that there is a celebration coming up soon, so preparations are underway. But the maid is not satisfied with the answer. After all, this is too little. A dozen cows will not feed the thousands of people who will come to the feast. Moreover, they are all peasants, who will quickly sweep everything from the tables to the crumbs. Linda, smiling, asks Eileen, who she thinks is closest to the master, if she might know at least some details. But the girl is disappointing. She hasn't been told anything. Scarlett intervenes here. She quickly cuts the meat and orders Linda to shut up and work, otherwise they won't have time to cook anything. Meanwhile, another maid brings in a new carcass, and Catherine stops at the door, having heard that the lord has lent money to neighboring villages. The girl is disappointed, because she is the only one who didn't know this. The other maids are not surprised, but simply tell her to take the knife and get to work. Catherine mumbles that she would like to borrow money from the lord herself, but she is immediately told, people only take out loans because they can't feed their lands, and such an idea is absurd. Hertha, having heard disparaging words about farmers, looks at Catherine reproachfully, because even gossip has its limits. But the girl's curiosity doesn't fade. Catherine speculates that the gentleman bought the meat from those he once lent it to, and now he's going to feed them with it. This raises new questions. Meanwhile, the young man, standing by the window in his office, thinks that debtors who cannot pay even small sums are unlikely to come to the banquet. Eileen enters the room and announces that everything is ready. The guy praises her work and allows the celebration to begin. Having gathered the guests at the entrance, the young lord gives a speech, thanks everyone who came, and calls himself by his name, Kane Carlier. He announces, today everyone can enjoy food and wine for free. Those present are amazed. They have never tasted anything like this, and many have still not been able to repay their debts. The guy adds, the estate's maids will happily serve the guests. They will pour wine, bring dishes, and keep the conversation going. The men, whispering to each other, admire the beauties surrounding them, fill their cups and lay out the dishes. As the atmosphere relaxes, Kane moves on to the main topic of the gathering. In the office, he asks one of the guests if he can pay the debt. The man makes excuses. He barely has enough to pay the interest because he has 8 hungry children. The young man pretends to sympathize and praises him for his efforts, then offers to take more meat and treat his family. Another complains that the flood has killed livestock and there is almost no food left in the village. The old man complains. His mill was destroyed by a change in the river's flow, and now he is completely destitute. Kane listens carefully to everyone and divides them into 2 groups. Those who can pay interest, he leaves with a deferral period, and those who cannot pay, he puts all the debt notes in a huge pile. Zen is surprised because there are so many papers, as if they reach the sky. Eileen asks what the guy is going to do with them and hears an unexpected answer. Burn them. The kobold and the maid exclaim in shock, but Kane repeats the order to burn all the debt papers. Sebastian lights a torch wrapped in a soaked rag, and all the guests look on in fear, not understanding what their lord is up to. The young man explains that his grandfather, the former ruler of these lands, Leopold Carlier, gave these loans as aid to those who had suffered from the elements. From now on, the money should go not to debts, but to the defense of the lands and the provision of soldiers. And so, as the current ruler, Kane Carlier solemnly proclaims, from this day forward, all debts for those who have been unable to pay them are cancelled. The villagers do not believe in their happiness. Debts have been cancelled. Now no one will have to sell their daughters, livestock, or give away their farms. People thank God and Kane himself, as if sent from above. Returning to the estate, Zen asks if the young gentleman is sure of his decision, since he has burned over 10 million pounds worth of receipts. The young man replies that against the backdrop of the already huge debt, these millions do not change anything. The land is already in decline, and if these people were left with interest, they would flee without paying anything, and Carlier needs residents who will help it revive, become rich, and pay taxes regularly in the future. Kobold objects. Among the invitees were those who could pay the interest. He doesn't understand why all debts should be wiped out without exception. Kane explains that he did it on purpose. What people hate most is being left out in matters of money. If he had secretly forgiven the debt of only the poor, it would have caused enmity. And so he simultaneously made everyone happy by solemnly declaring forgiveness, fed the guests, and dispelled their wariness by allowing them to honestly talk about their situation. As a result, Kane checked all the debtors, separated those who had money from those who didn't, got rid of a pile of useless papers, and raised his authority. Now dozens of people will remain grateful to him forever. Zen looks at him with sincere admiration, admitting that the plan is wonderful. The young man smiles proudly, because he learned all this from Meng Yaojun's biography. There is a conversation in the women's wing. Eileen sincerely praises Mr. Kane, saying that his actions speak louder than words. Linda immediately mocks, calling Eileen a girl in love, because she praises the young lord at every opportunity. However, others agree that after such an act, they should all rethink their attitude towards the master. After all, he could have demanded every last penny, but he chose mercy, proving himself trustworthy. The maids regret that they had underestimated him before. Now all attention is focused on Eileen. She is being pinned to the wall, told that she has no right to claim such a noble lord. If so, then let her take him away from everyone at once. Meanwhile, Kane himself is resting in his office in a chair, enjoying the peace and quiet, glad that no one is buzzing in his ear. But suddenly the fairy Opria appears before him again, reminding him that she is not a hallucination, but his beloved, the goddess mother of the earth. The boy frowns and asks when she became his lover. The girl with wings laughs, saying she already knows about his feelings. But Kane abruptly cuts off the conversation and demands to see the statistics screen. Annoyed by the lack of romance, she still follows the order. The screen shows people's faith has increased from 56 to 65, and personal reputation has risen from 48 to 68. The fairy is sure that at this rate his fame will only grow, and he will become the best lord. The guy looks closely and asks why medicine has declined so much. Opria explains, it's not about him, but about the bandits in the west, who have become more active again since the beginning of the year and are carrying out raids. Having understood this situation, Kane wants to check the status of the debt. Thea asks if he is really ready for this. It turns out that the debt has grown to 43 million pounds. The young man is shocked, because he does not understand where these sums come from, and the goddess cannot explain the details. She only shows the final figures. The guy asks her to disappear, but before she leaves a reward. She kisses him loudly on the cheek and disappears into thin air. At that moment, there is a knock on the door, and Kane, still touched by the unexpected kiss, is getting ready. Eileen is standing outside the door, asking permission to enter. The other maids come in with her. Apologizing for the intrusion, the girl says that they are all impressed by the master's action and want to thank him personally. The guy understands that these are Eileen's close friends, thanks them all, and emphasizes that what has been achieved has become possible thanks to their efforts. Smiling, Scarlet replies that their work pales next to the exploits of the young lord, and promises that Carlier's maids will do everything they can to make his life easier. Kane sincerely thanks her by name, and mentally notes her lively character. Scarlet is surprised that he knows her name, but the young man says that everyone on this estate is one family to him. He lists: Catherine has beautiful golden curls. Gertrude has silky black hair. Francesca has short brown hair. And little Gemma has bright blue eyes. Eileen is also surprised how he managed to remember all the girls despite being so busy. Kane adds that he even knows about Linda, although for some reason everyone always passes her by. For Linda, this description seemed harsh, although it was nice that she had not been forgotten and even knew her by sight. The guy sums up: the holiday was a success thanks to the work of each of them, and if the girls want an award, they just have to ask. There is no money yet due to the crisis, but he is ready to give the rest. Scarlet steps forward and asks for a word. Eileen tries to stop her, already guessing what her friend is trying to achieve. However, Kane replies that he will listen to any request, and Scarlet openly declares that she wants to hug the young gentleman. He couldn't refuse. The next moment he found himself with his face pressed against her firm breasts. The guy was burning with shame, although he didn't protest. The other maids mutter in discontent, considering it unfair. Francesca smiles and asks for a hug too. Even the shy Gertrude dares to step forward and ask for a hug too. The guy asks to take turns, but no one listens to him. Breaking free from the tight embrace, Kane asks the girls if they find it all a bit too strange. Later, conversations take place in the maids' rooms. Everyone discusses how nice and at the same time reliable the gentleman is. Francesca is surprised that Scarlet dared to be the first. Others joke that the girl's heart has already been captured by the young lord. One of the maids chides Scarlet, saying it is indecent to impose himself like that. But she angrily replies that everyone has the right to enjoy his company. Suddenly, footsteps are heard in the hallway. The girls fall silent, listening. Sebastian stands in the doorway, neat, stern, and silent, waiting for an explanation. The senior maid steps forward, bows, and the others bow after her. Silence falls in the room. Leaning a little closer, the butler coldly asks what they are doing in the master's office. The girl is confused. She makes the excuse that they just wanted to thank her for a good deed. Sebastian raises an eyebrow skeptically, but says nothing. As he leaves, he strictly orders them not to make any more noise in the corridors. The girls agree in unison. A half-month has passed since the debt-canceling festival. To put the lands in order, the young lord decides that the root of all the troubles must be found. In his office, he is thinking that Zen can't handle the library by himself, so he should find him an assistant. At that moment, there is a knock on the door. Sebastian appears on the doorstep, visibly agitated, and apologizes for disturbing her. Kane looks up and asks how urgent the matter is. In response, the butler confirms: bandits have become more active in the west of Boulay, and the general is requesting reinforcements. The boy realizes that from now on, it is he, not his uncle, who must make military decisions. He recalls Apria's words about the decline in medical indicators due to these raids. If nothing is done, the healthcare system will collapse completely. The young man calculates. His army has about 4,000 soldiers, 2,000 concentrated in the center. Will 300 be enough to support the front? Sebastian confirms with relief that this will be more than enough. Resolutely, Kane signs a decree and hands it to the butler, ordering 300 warriors and supplies to be sent west. Sebastian respectfully accepts the order. The lord himself would not want to hire new soldiers from the capital, because the treasury is empty. But if the situation worsens, both the people and the lands will suffer. Looking through the lists, he sees that many famous warriors once served under his grandfather, but now most of them are too old and unfit. Others left the service altogether after the transfer of the lands to his father, the very one whom Kane angrily calls a bastard. He bitterly admits that his father's stamp and his inaction ruined his entire life. The young gentleman could have asked Sebastian to take part in this matter, but right now Kane felt an acute lack of some cheat skill that would save the situation. He burst into an indignant cry, asking why he needed a crowd of beautiful maids when capable vassals and generals would be much more useful. The lack of experienced people was another problem that had to be solved immediately. The guy promised himself that as soon as he got the paperwork done, he would meet with his uncle. Leaving the office and walking down the long corridor with his hands behind his head, he thought he could afford a short rest until his uncle returned. At that moment, a voice was heard outside the windows, announcing the arrival of a messenger to the estate. Kane, already on the stairs, abruptly jumped down, trying to understand where all this commotion was coming from. Running into the hall, he asked the frightened maid what exactly had happened, but the girl only bowed in confusion, unable to find the words. Running further, Kane heard the cry of Zen, who was bending over the wounded warrior. He warned him to leave immediately, but the young lord could not understand what was the matter. A half-dead warrior, covered in blood and lying face down, croaked out that 10,000 soldiers were approaching these lands. Seeing the spear in the warrior's back, Kane ordered immediate help for him, and asked if the stranger was from the western lands. He confirmed through the pain and even managed to utter with an effort of will that Goliath himself was approaching. Sebastian explained that Goliath was a renowned warrior and headman of the western village, loyal to his people, who had always paid his taxes. Why he had descended into banditry was a mystery. Meanwhile, thousands of angry warriors marched in formation, shouting threats and raising their weapons. Ahead thundered the voice of Goliath, calling the Lord to come out to him, eager to flay him with his own hands. Goliath was 42, a burly giant with an axe, his face burning with anger, his steps heavy and relentless. He walked confidently towards the young lord. Among the entourage, Kane, without hesitation, declared that he understood everything perfectly. And to begin with, just a conversation with Goliath would be enough. One of the nobles spoke to Kane in surprise, asking what he was up to. Another guard warmly offered an escort, but the young lord replied that soldiers would not help in these negotiations. He even asked Zen to bring him a chair so he could have a more comfortable conversation, which stunned everyone present. The crowd was both delighted and concerned by his boldness. Some whispered that Goliath's behavior seemed suspicious. Already on the field, sitting on the chair that Zen was holding, Kane turned to the giant, asking if he was Goliath, and suggesting that he listen to him carefully. The giant looked at the little one in surprise. With firm determination, the young man declared that he was the son of the master of these lands, Kane Carlier, the current lord, and had heard a lot about Goliath. In response, the warrior growled that even being related to Mr. Leopold would not appease his fierce hatred. With an unwavering gaze, Kane asked him to first calm down and explain why such a respected man was behaving like a barbarian. Even more irritated, Goliath gritted his teeth, asking if the lord didn't know what the nobles and officials had done. Kane sincerely apologized and emphasized that he had only recently become a lord, but he was sure that Goliath would not have rebelled without a good reason. The young man, eager to learn the truth about the crimes of his hated father, asked to tell everything frankly. The warrior explained. To the people, the former Lord Leopold was like a god. But after his death, Kane's father took power and everything went awry. Greedy officials broke the prohibitions. In anger, Goliath exclaimed that these bastards had defiled the priestess of the Temple of Mother Earth. The shrine, which had been worshipped since ancient times, had become the property of the Carlier family. And as the warrior emphasized, if Leopold were alive, he would allow justice to be judged, but he would never entrust such a right to the tyrant Nicholas Carlier. The young lord realized that he was not just an angry rebel, but a man whose rage and pain bore a terrible truth. He understood the fullness of Goliath's despair. The giant resolutely proclaimed that any corrupt official who dared to desecrate the shrine would pay with his own head, loftily raising his weapon to the sky. Kane agreed with Goliath and declared that such bastards truly deserved punishment. What's more, he was ready to reward the warrior for his loyalty. Goliath was stunned by these words. Before him stood a boy, but at the same time a wise and brave lord, beyond his years. The young lord confirmed the seriousness of his intention, explaining that his father was ill and did not control the lands. Nicholas Carlier had sent him in his place, and he himself wanted to change these lands. Kane vowed to personally travel to every corner of the earth, exposing and punishing the guilty. He was pleased that Goliath had taken the first step towards purification. Rising from his chair and extending his hand to the warrior, he thanked him on behalf of his father and grandfather. Goliath was so angry that the axe fell from his hands. The rage in the giant's heart instantly dissipated. He stood confused, unable to gather his thoughts together. Kane apologized again for the pain his father had caused and promised that this year the guilty officials would receive the punishment they deserved, and the people would breathe a sigh of relief. Goliath came to his senses, but he said in disbelief that anyone could speak like that in the face of death. Why should he believe the boy's words? Then Kane decided to prove his seriousness and ordered Zen to bring something from the pantry. The servant instantly disappeared to carry out the errand. In a moment, a pile of treasures appeared before them, shining in the sun. Goliath did not understand why the young man had shown him all the riches of the Carlier's house. Kane, looking at the glittering jewels, said it looked more like a temple than a treasure. Smiling, he added that he first wanted to sell it to traders, and they estimated the value at tens of millions. Goliath could not believe his eyes. Before him was wealth he had never imagined. The merchants assured them that they would be able to sell this good profitably. Cain suggested that Goliath himself accompany them to the capital and return with the money. The warrior crossed his arms over his chest and asked what would happen if he appropriated these funds for himself. But Cain calmly replied that he was sure that Goliath would spend them on helping his people. With confidence and a smile, he emphasized, "It doesn't matter whether he gives away the treasures or takes them away. They will still benefit ordinary people." The young lord's generosity impressed the warrior. Now he had no doubt. Cain truly had the blood of Lord Leopold flowing in his veins. Goliath called his brother Guru Rai. Together they discussed the proposal and decided to fully trust the new ruler. The warrior and the young lord shook hands, sealing the deal with honor and mutual promise. With a loud call, Goliath ordered his men to escort the merchants to the capital, collect their money, and return them home. At the entrance to the estate, the maids whispered, not believing what they were hearing. They were frightened by the screams and laughter from the courtyard. Sebastian sighed with relief. Cain had even managed to deal with the army that had come at them. One of the guards tearfully called the young gentleman a genius. Scarlet admitted that they, the maids, would have to grow up to be worthy of such deeds from their master. The others also recognized him as amazing. And within a few hours, Goliath's army returned to the Carlier estate with bags of money. Cain greeted them with a smile, praised the warrior, and immediately asked about the situation in the lands. Goliath described in detail the terrible situation, especially where the gangs were once again launching their attacks. The young lord understood the whole picture and said that he knew how to proceed. Goliath was surprised and asked what exactly he meant. Cain explained, "Their lands resemble a hellish cauldron, where sinners break out, but there is a lack of true warriors capable of restraining them." Cain recalled that the warrior had always been loyal to the Carlier family and had paid taxes to his grandfather for years. He sincerely regretted that the family's crimes had caused Goliath to lose his trust. The young lord recognized how important this land and its people were to the warrior. Therefore, on behalf of the Carliers, he decided to give him all the gold the soldiers had brought from the capital. He asked that these funds be used to purchase provisions and create an army capable of clearing the lands of bandits. Goliath was stunned. He couldn't believe that the Lord would trust him with such a task. Cain was even more surprised and asked if the warrior objected. But Goliath, deeply moved, knelt down and declared that he accepted the honor. The giant's throat tightened with gratitude. His heart trembled, and he could barely hold back his tears. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore and burst into tears, swearing that he would use the money for good. The warrior believed that these funds would help not only destroy the bandits, but also feed the hungry and provide a roof over the heads of the needy. The Lord smiled sincerely and reached out, lifting his new general from his knees. Cain ordered all their weapons to be brought, but they looked more like a pile of junk. Examining the blades, he was convinced that it was impossible to win with such swords, but it would be excellent material for a new forging. The soldiers whispered, not understanding the young lord's intentions. Goliath's brother doubted, but the warrior himself trusted Cain infinitely and never took his eyes off him. At that moment, pulsations ran through the boy's palm. The magical waves of earth and alchemy were gaining strength. A whirlwind of energy descended upon the weapon, and everything around it shone with light. "Steel rebirth," Cain exclaimed, letting the magic take hold of the scrap. Goliath realized with horror that he didn't even know the boy's true power. And in an instant, a gleaming arsenal of new blades stood before the warriors. Goliath, holding the exhausted Cain in his arms, watched as he himself restored dozens of swords in a matter of seconds. Exhausted but full of honor, Cain fulfilled his promise and rewarded the soldiers. Goliath could no longer hold back his tears. The master's generosity was superhuman. The warriors, having taken up their weapons, no longer saw them as old broken blades. Their faith in the Lord only grew. The exhausted Cain croaked for Goliath to carry him to Sebastian. Sebastian only smiled. He was already carrying the young gentleman back to the estate. They were met at the entrance by a concerned butler. Hearing that the Lord was weak, he immediately called Jeff and Eileen. In a moment, two figures appeared, a maid and a faithful soldier. They hurried to carry the young master to his chambers. Sebastian greeted Goliath, saying that it had been a long time since he had seen him. The warrior replied with regret that he should have come earlier. But what happened happened. Cain's condition was no longer critical. His faithful men carefully carried him into the room. On this day, 11-year-old Cain Carlier, through alchemy and the experience of 2 lifetimes, gathered 10,000 warriors under his banner. But the real tests lay ahead. The gardens of the Carlier estate became a camp for Goliath's army. Every year more and more provisions were brought here. The Lord, along with Zen, watched the soldiers through the window. He noted that the garden had come to life, and Zen added that now everyone knew about their master's incredible abilities. Cain only modestly replied that Zen was exaggerating, since he had only restored an already finished form. The servant emphasized his modesty. Zen then noted that Cain showed genuine kindness to the warriors, even in his food. The young man remembered an old Chinese proverb, "A hero is one who feeds the hungry." Suddenly, Sebastian quietly appeared behind him and signaled to the young master that it was time for a serious conversation. The butler, in his usual calm and quiet voice, asked the young gentleman to give him some time. Cain replied briskly and pleasantly that it was no problem at all, but it would be better to talk in his office. Sitting in his chair, arms folded across his chest, the boy asked, since the reason for the visit was serious. Sebastian probably wanted to know if the Lord was planning to go to the capital. Cain openly stated that he had noticed that the butler had deliberately kept away from him since his arrival at the estate. The servant's surprise knew no bounds. He had not expected the young master to understand his behavior so quickly and accurately. The boy winked, saying that alchemists see the essence not only of things, but also of people. That was why he felt that the old man had been hiding something all this time. The butler's expression only confirmed Cain's words, and he was confused that he had been exposed so easily. The young master laughed and asked not to take what he said too literally, noting that Sebastian had served his grandfather faithfully. The butler, crossing his arms, looked sternly at the master and asked if he intended to make fun of him. Cain smiled sincerely in return. He wasn't joking, nor was he running away from problems. He firmly declared that he wouldn't leave these lands to chance. The old man was again at a loss, not knowing what to say to such insightful words from the young master. Cain spoke about his background. His father was sick, his grandfather was dead, and his uncle was too old. Now he was the only one capable of taking responsibility, and the boy asked directly, what would happen to these lands if he ran away? Sebastian honestly admitted that he used to not care, but now his opinion has changed. Cain, with fire in his voice, declared that he would devote all his strength to paying off debts and saving these lands and people. He believed that true governance was only possible when the economy was functioning properly. The young man added that common people often despised money, calling it an abomination to the soul. But he considered such people to be fools. After all, money can be both a blessing and a curse. It all depends on how you use it. People are willing to fight even for a single coin. He resolutely tossed the coin up, explaining that their lives depended entirely on it. To him, money is just a mirror that reflects a person's true essence. Saying this, he caught the coin with his finger in his palm. The boy looked sternly at his servant and asked if he was ready to support his decision. Cain dreamed of helping people and living a happy life at the same time. The servant bowed his head, realizing his mistake. He explained that he had seen the decline of the lands and did not want the young owner to waste his best years on their revival. But now he realized that he had made the decision for him selfishly. Kneeling, the old man apologized for his own arbitrariness. Cain assured him that he saw no fault in it. Sitting on the edge of the table with a friendly smile, the boy said that he was still too young and inexperienced, so he needed help from his elders. He sincerely hoped that Sebastian would accept his request, and they sealed it with a handshake. The butler merely reminded him of tomorrow's business. Cain thanked him, as always energetically, promising to continue to rely on his support. Night had fallen. The young master was already dozing in bed when the door opened softly, and Eileen's voice was heard. Lying with his eyes half closed, he wondered why she had come so late. Sebastian had hardly sent her on night duty. Suddenly he heard her soft words behind him, begging for forgiveness and saying that she had no other choice. The boy thought with cold irony that something unusual was waiting for him again. She lifted the covers sharply, trying to grab him, while at the same time ordering him to stop. The young gentleman instantly jumped aside from the maid who had fallen on him, and, with an ironic smile, asked what exactly she was trying to do. Frightened and confused, the girl only blurted out that Catherine had advised her to do so, and that she was trying to do what was best for the Lord. Cain asked in surprise if she understood that even if she kidnapped him, she would still be captured in the end. He explained that he was indeed going on a campaign tomorrow to quell the riots, but not to fight on the front lines. He would be going with Goliath, Jeff, and the knights. Eileen begged to be taken with her, for the Lord certainly needed someone to look after and protect him. Cain, surprised and concerned, asked to understand that the defenseless girl should not be there, because enemies could kidnap her or, even worse, cause irreparable harm. Leaning closer, she continued to plead, asking why he was so stubbornly unwilling to take her with him. The boy stepped back again and firmly said that she had no place on the battlefield. Eileen didn't give up. Wouldn't he be completely scared without them on the road? And the young man would be lying if he said he didn't feel an ounce of fear. In a decisive voice, he said that if they continued to turn a blind eye to the bandits' atrocities, they would all be in danger, and he could not allow that to happen. The maid understood everything, but, unable to restrain herself, threw herself on his neck, squeezing tightly, as if she was afraid of losing him forever. She didn't back down. Worrying about him was breaking her heart, and if he left and didn't come back, his heart would stop for her too. The young man, looking at her gently, assured her with a smile that he was not going to die there, and asked her again and again to calm down. Seeing the fear in her eyes, he couldn't find words and only reminded her that he had never deceived her, so she should trust him. As a sign of his affection, Cain kissed Eileen and made her promise to believe him and wait, even though a bitter uneasiness remained in her heart. She wanted to add something, but he interrupted her, reminding her that she had already given her word, and therefore had to keep it. Embarrassed, but firmly, the girl admitted that she still wanted to be useful to her master in some way. If his age had allowed it, he would have asked for another one, but for now, he just said quietly that he would like to sleep on her lap. Eileen was sincerely glad to be of service in this way, and tenderly allowed him to rest on her lap as long as he wished. The next morning, Cain set out for the neighboring villages, where, amidst cheers from the poor, he called upon all who were able to bear arms. He sent those who were unable back to the estate. Appointing Goliath as commander-in-chief, he gathered 300 more warriors, ready to rush into battle. The Carlier lands remained in turmoil. Bandit raids and uprisings spread throughout the southern and northern regions, with the only exception being the east. Meanwhile, the reinforcements Sebastian had gathered during the night had joined the Carlier's army. They were veterans who had once served his grandfather, true warriors of the old school. Under the leadership of Captain Alberto, 30 more soldiers joined the ranks, and with them a whole detachment of 500 recruits. Cain immediately received both experienced commanders and numerous reinforcements. The infantry was led by Goliath, and 500 cavalry came under the command of Jeff. Cain first decided to subdue the eastern lands, the main stronghold of the Carlier family. He sought to show strength and suppress rebellions in this region. Following orders, the infantrymen, led by Goliath, reconquered village after village, boldly marching forward. One of the warriors brought news that Goliath's army had captured the East Castle, and this victory genuinely pleased Cain. Now the East belonged to them, and the young lord wanted to hear the following proposals from his military leaders. Former Knight of the Guard Alberto explained, "If the East has already been conquered, it is possible to establish contact with the vassals, who once numbered 67,000, and now only 10 remain." The commanders expressed their readiness to act, to place the headquarters in the center of the East, to send someone to the north, and to send Goliath to the south. Everyone agreed that the enemies were too poorly prepared. Seeing such enthusiasm, Cain thanked Sebastian for being able to gather so many talented people around him. But the old man was genuinely surprised, because the soldiers followed the young lord not because of an order, but voluntarily, seeing true aspiration in him. After the victory in the east, the Carlier's headquarters were moved to the very center, and the army continued to suppress the uprising with unprecedented speed. A month had passed since Cain had left the estate, and the warlords were reporting on the situation. Things were going brilliantly in the north and south, so Jeff and Goliath should be back very soon. The young man personally thanked his commanders because he sincerely believed that without them he would never have achieved such progress. Cain had neither money, nor strength, nor combat experience, but he desired peace for these lands, and that is why they rallied around him and achieved great results. Captain Alberto then thought that no one would have listened to the boy unconditionally if he had not had true strength and inner stability. The old warrior stared at him and was convinced that this young man was not at all like ordinary young aristocrats, for he respected others and listened to every word. However, there was one difference. Leopold himself stood at the head of the army and fought alongside the soldiers. And this guy was clearly aware of his own weaknesses and therefore asked for help from the strong, using all available resources. Alberto decided that this behavior was the traits of an ideal commander. Approaching Cain, he thanked him, noting that the young man was doing an excellent job in his role as commander, and these words inspired the boy. Their conversation was interrupted by a soldier who ran into the tent and reported that an army of 300 enemies had broken into their camp, so he asked the lord to flee. Cain quickly calculated that a dozen warlords would be no match for 30, but he refused to flee, and Alberto was horrified to realize that he had decided to fight. Snapping his fingers to awaken alchemical magic, Cain coldly replied that he would not enter the battle himself. The warriors, gathered behind him, looked on in confusion, not understanding the plan, but the young man only waved his hand and ordered them to look carefully. By waving his hands in the air and striking the ground with them, he summoned creatures that looked like clay golems. Sparks flew everywhere, and the ground rose in living blocks. In a moment, a whole army of creatures stood behind Cain, and he ordered the commanders to use them as a vanguard because, being made of clay, no weapon could harm them. Alberto realized that now they could handle it and swore to protect the young lord. Cain laughed merrily and promised to do his best to fight alongside them against the bandits. He himself honestly didn't understand how his golems had grown into such giants, and wondered if his alchemy had become stronger after that weapon transformation. The rebels, seeing the golems, dropped their weapons and fled in panic. And at the exit from the forest, the Carlier warriors were already waiting for them, because Cain had ordered an ambush to be prepared in advance. The brave soldiers, standing side by side, quickly suppressed the enemy's weak resistance. The commanders noted the enemy's inexperience and the slowness of their strikes. Alberto proclaimed that there would be no mercy or leniency for those who dared to attack the young lord. The cavalry commander felt a terrible rush of adrenaline, as if he had returned to his youth 20 years ago, and rushed forward, cutting the air with his sword. He thought that these fools could win by going around from the other side. But in the end, they themselves fell into the trap foreseen by Cain. The old warrior remembered his grandson, the same age as the young lord, and could not understand how one could be so intelligent at such an age, since his own grandson was not even close to being like him. Meanwhile, the battle was already over. At the same time, important news arrived. Mr. Jeff's cavalry had completely conquered the north, and at noon they announced that the commanders would personally arrive at headquarters to report on their successes, because the south was now under the control of Goliath's infantry. The good news lifted everyone's spirits, but Alberto reminded them that the most difficult challenge lay ahead, the battle with the west, where everything would be finally decided. Cain thanked the soldiers for their courage and bravery, but the modest Alberto, bowing his head low, considered himself unworthy of such praise. In the tent, Cain spoke with Zen, who wondered why the young lord was enduring such miserable conditions, and was told that he could return if he was in trouble. But Zen, sighing, declared that he would not leave his master, even if the worries and poverty of the camp were tearing at his soul and causing him insomnia. Cain was certain that fate was on his side, so he knew no fear, only bright optimism burning in his eyes. However, Zen did not give up. Their army only numbered 20,000, and it was unwise to go against the west, where there was strength and experience. Cain corrected him, saying there were more fighters, they were better trained, and besides, there was always Sebastian, stronger even than Jeff. Lord emphasized that they now have both a quantitative and territorial advantage, and this could be a decisive factor in a war. Yet he did not hide it. The peasants were capable of fleeing the battlefield, and we must be prepared for this, because fear is stronger than promises. Zen agreed. After all, these are simple farmers, without training or discipline, and such a result would not be surprising. But it is the nobles who bear responsibility for their subjects, and Cain has promised to shoulder this burden along with his associates. Zen was worried because Cain's power extends far beyond the camp. It is already becoming power over people's hearts. Cain only sighed. He himself would not want to be here, but circumstances demand sacrifice. Otherwise, these lands will never heal. Zen asked if the troubles would end after the fall of the West, and heard an affirmative answer. These are the lands that are the most difficult to conquer. There stands Count Palladium's army, a formidable force, ready to fight to the end. The Count convinces the people that he is seizing the Carlier lands to protect them from tyranny, and some of the villagers believe him. Although Cain's army was larger, it was mostly composed of peasants, while the Count's was made up of experienced warriors, and the losses could have been enormous. The Lord offered peace talks, but Palladium, as expected, ignored them, wanting only war. Therefore, the clash was inevitable, and without victory over the West, there would be no change in the fate of these lands. The era of my grandfather Leopold is over, thought Cain. Now I will prove to the Count that a new time has come, and set off on a campaign. Two armies met on a hilly plain, 25,000 Carliers against 20,000 Palladiums. A battle where strength, not numbers, would decide. But Cain's army consisted of simple peasants, while the Count's army consisted of hardened warriors who knew the price of every blow. The young man understood that defeat was quite real, and heavy thoughts haunted him every time he imagined a close battle. But Goliath and his infantry were striking in their stubbornness. He swore to take back the lands and led the peasants forward without fear. It was their solidarity and belief in a common cause that became the force that has already led them to victories. Jeff warned, the enemy is now much more dangerous, and they won't be able to stand against such veterans for long. Alberto had repeatedly told the young lord that even with success, if the battle dragged on, the chances of victory would drop sharply. Cain agreed that breaking into the Count's lands would be extremely difficult, so he decided to use Goliath's sturdy infantry. Frowning seriously, he ordered a warrior named Gary to be summoned to discuss his plan with the experienced fighter. A stocky man with a scar across his face entered the tent, who, smiling, accepted the Lord's order without the slightest doubt. Cain ordered Goliath's infantry to support Jeff's squad, to boost their morale, and sent his younger brother Guru Ray to the villages where enemy troops were hiding. The young lord's plan was to undermine the enemy's faith in victory. But Count Palladium, enraged, sought to achieve triumph at any cost, spending the last of his money on new troops. The scouts brought terrible news. The enemy's forces had increased by another 20,000, and Cain, holding back his anger, understood that the time for hesitation was over. He decided to gather all his men and finish off the Count's army in one decisive battle, even if it meant risking everything. The Lord was burning with determination, eager to prove to the Earl that he would regret his foolish challenge. As Palladium's fresh reinforcements moved forward, they were met by Goliath's infantry, fearlessly pushing through the enemy ranks. Goliath, brandishing a heavy axe, charged at his enemies with fury, each blow forcing the enemy army to retreat. The horsemen tried to surround the giant, but he, like a storm, repelled every attack, dodging and delivering devastating counterattacks. All of Cain's troops saw his strength, and it burned as an example for them. Their fighting spirit grew like a fire that devours everything around. Goliath's courage inspired everyone, and the warriors, forgetting their fear, rushed forward with a cry of victory. On the right and left flanks, Jeff and the other commanders held their positions, repelling the enemy's frantic attacks. Cain led the battle calmly and confidently, ordering the enemy to be trapped, even in the face of 40,000 enemy spears. His plan was audacious: to lure the Count's entire army into a cage of barricades and spikes that the soldiers had been building for several days. To dishearten the enemies, Cain released golems that blocked their escape routes, and half of the Count's army was mired in chaos. The young lord confidently declared to Goliath that the last battle remained, to break the enemy's spirit, and the war would end in their victory. When asked about his readiness, Goliath only smiled. He was already burning with impatience to mount his horse and pass sentence on every enemy with his own hand. Mounting his horse, the infantry general proudly introduced himself to the enemies and loudly challenged the commander-in-chief of the enemy army to a duel. In response, a loud voice rang out from the rear. The general of the Palladium army, Blaise Daraf, wearing a helmet made of a beast's skull, stepped forward. He shouted that the Carliers were dead and their people were starving, so let Cain's army lay down its arms and then he would grant peace. Goliath proudly rejected his words, declaring that the people would decide for themselves whom to serve and would not bow to rotten tyrants. He publicly proclaimed that their true ruler was the young Cain Carlier, wise and just, capable of reviving these lands from the ashes. The Count defiantly acknowledged the enemy's choice and raised his spear, which had already taken the lives of 7 Carlier warriors, vowing to kill even more. Both generals flew forward on their horses, clashing in a terrifying jolt that made the ground tremble. Palladium raced like the demon of war itself, ready to sweep away anyone who stood in its way. Goliath also flew towards him, his horse tearing the air, and the warrior himself personified the courage of the common people. The earth trembled under their collision, and at the decisive moment, Goliath's axe cut through the air along with the enemy's defenses. Blaise Daraf, unable to believe his own defeat, fell from his horse, his face cut open by a powerful blow. Goliath, dismounting, mockingly said that this blow was far from the only one, and the enemy fell not by chance, but by the strength of the people. Cain's senior warriors confirmed. Goliath's movements were lightning fast, and his axe delivered dozens of blows that destroyed resistance. Everything crumbled before the Count's eyes in a fog. He realized that the battle was lost, and with it his spirit had disappeared. Goliath proclaimed with enthusiasm that he had defeated the general of Count Palladium's army, Blaise Daraf, and challenged anyone who dared to seek revenge, for he was ready to accept any challenge. The Count's army froze in horror. The soldiers stood with their mouths open, realizing that if their general could not withstand the blow, then they would certainly not be able to defeat the giant. Cain watched with satisfaction as fear paralyzed the enemies, but Alberto warned that if they found a new leader, their fervor might return. The young lord hesitated whether it was right to finish off a decapitated army, but the experienced commander convinced him that such was the reality of war. Alberto rightly observed that these soldiers were different from Goliath, and would go on a massacre again and again if they were spared. After all, the Count rejected Cain's letter, so the consequences of their losses are the choice of the ruler himself, and now mercy will only turn into a new threat. Cain Carlier, wishing peace and prosperity for these lands, took upon himself the sins of his family, ready to pay for them with the blood of his enemies, and Goliath instantly rushed to the attack. Jeff also resolutely entered the battle, for the Earl's army had disregarded the young lord's kindness, just as he and Goliath had once been given a chance by him. Guru Rai's warriors mercilessly crushed their enemies, becoming stronger and more steadfast with every passing minute. Alberto, not far behind, also rushed forward, finding in the very name of Cain the strength and meaning for cruel retribution. Thus, young Cain managed to defeat the trained army of Count Palladium, thanking each of his warriors, because together they destroyed the main threat. And although not all of the Count's soldiers were killed, news of the crushing defeat was already spreading rapidly throughout his lands. People whispered that Kane's army had incredible weapons and immortal clay giants, and even when they were just created golems, the difference no longer existed to the enemies. As Kane had predicted, rumors of the Carlier's power quickly spread throughout the lands of Palladium, stirring fear and confusion. But the young lord feared that the enraged Earl might, in desperation, throw 100,000 warriors into battle. And to avoid this, he sent a messenger with a proposal for peace. The mediator was the sorceress Marin Roof, elegant and dangerous, who knew how to find a subtle approach to any situation. Looking into the Count's face, she declared that refusing the truce would be considered a personal enmity against her friend Kane. The Count, full of despair and disappointment, did not dare to argue. He was forced to accept the terms of peace. Marin considered herself indebted to the young lord and sincerely called him a friend, because she still had not thanked him for saving little Lord Meow. Kane was even afraid to imagine what would have happened if he hadn't saved the cat that day, because fate had given him a faithful ally in the person of a sorceress. Hearing the mention of God, Oprah immediately appeared, with her usual care and friendliness, but the young man coldly called her a moth. The fairy, in love with her master, tried to wrest at least a little bit of his attention, perceiving even mockery as a hidden manifestation of feelings. But Kane smiled good-naturedly, because she had come to help again and show him the table with the results of land development after the battle. The indicators looked better than ever before. Personal popularity and people's faith in their lord were growing steadily. Even Oprah was impressed. Healthcare, thanks to Kane's decisions, has noticeably improved in its indicators. The Lord himself, although tired, was not surprised by this. Because everything seemed natural after the victory over Palladium, only the decline in trade and agriculture worried him. Surprised, he asked why production rates had increased then, and the fairy explained that the reason was the mass forging of weapons and the creation of golems. Oprah drew attention to the main thing. The number of deaths had dropped sharply, and this was an extraordinary sign for war-torn lands. Kane, however, admitted that the merit also lay in the expulsion of the wealthy merchants who supported the Count, for along with the expulsion he took away their wealth. The fairy condemned such cruelty, calling exile an excessive punishment, but Kane disagreed. Those who profit from someone else's misfortune are the embodiment of evil and must be punished. In reality, these people had defected to the enemy, and while not all of them were the embodiment of evil, their actions left a dark mark. But Kane, in a calm voice, confirmed Opria's disturbing thoughts. The young lord wondered what might happen if they immediately asked these rich people to transfer the money to the state treasury. However, doubts quickly dissipated. Kane firmly believed that there was no eye for an eye principle here. It was their own fault, because they chose to profit next to the enemy, and now their wealth would go to repay the debt. His words hurt Opria. She begged him not to commit such cruelty again. The young man promised that he would abstain, but slyly added that if the treasury became empty, the goddess must lend him the money. Exhausted from the fighting, Kane felt that even talking to Opria was draining his last strength. In the silence of the night, there was a knock on his tent. The guest was wrapped in a scarf that hid his face, apologizing for his late visit, asking if the young lord was asleep. He pulled back the curtain and entered, and Kane calmly asked for the kettle to be placed to the side. The stranger bowed politely and offered to drink the tea while it was still hot. Listening to his creaky voice and frail posture, Kane was surprised and asked if there was sugar in it. The stranger hastily replied that he had already sweetened the drink. A moment later, Kane pulled out his weapon, coldly telling him that he had miscalculated because he never drank his tea with sugar. The attacker drew his blades and stood in a fighting stance, his eyes shining from under his hood. The young man reacted with lightning speed. He jumped to avoid the blow, trying to figure out who this stranger was and why he attacked an unarmed man. With a single stroke of his blade, the guest shattered the table into pieces, and Kane, with only a book in his hands, felt that this was his only defense. It was the book that saved him from a fatal blow, taking on the power of the enemy's sword. The guy even joked bitterly in his mind that if he had known this, he would have bought a book on jujitsu in a past life instead of this one. Suddenly, Opria appeared, rushing to the defense of her baby Kane, and the attacker ducked away from the flying creature in confusion. Her wings beat at him, confusing him. He barely had time to brush aside her swift blows. Kane realized that it was this distraction that gave him a chance to save himself. The time has come to apply equivalent exchange, because in the hands of an alchemist, anything is subject to transformation. The guy recreated the sword, and now the forces were equal, because with the weapon, he had a much better chance. In the process, he accidentally knocked over several candles, which fell and set the tent on fire, with flames quickly spreading around. Noticing the fire, Zen and the guards rushed to the tent, and Kane explained to them that it was a mercenary who had infiltrated his camp. The soldiers ordered the stranger to lay down his weapons, otherwise they would use force. Realizing the hopelessness, the attacker rushed to escape, but Cain cut off his legs. He quickly grabbed him by the limbs and tied him up. The job was done. The mercenary was captured. Cain ordered the fire to be put out and the prisoner not to be killed until he had interrogated him. After tearing off the scarf, everyone froze. In front of them stood a girl on her knees, so fragile that it was hard to believe that it was she who was hiding under the mask of a murderer. Looking closely, Cain realized that she was his age, but why had she entered his tent, armed and alone in the middle of the night? With a cry and tears in her eyes, she accused the young gentleman of everything, confessing that she belonged to the Lafayette Company, which Cain had ruined and driven into exile. After hearing the accusations, the young man sternly asked if she knew that their company had joined the Palladium camp and was financing the war, which was killing villages and innocent people. Cain explained that he considered this a betrayal of the Carlier house and had every right to take their lives, but he left them alive, only taking their property. The girl refused to believe him, considering him only a child. The Lord asked what connected her to the Lafayette Company and asked for her name. She replied that her name was Shiloh, and with hatred confessed that she regretted not having slit his throat when she had the chance. Gritting her teeth, the girl added that she was a servant for Mrs. Lillian. This surprised Cain, because she looked like an ordinary maid. It was the first time he had heard that name, which angered the already embittered Shiloh. She said that her mistress respected grandfather Cain, and even after the change of power helped Carlier. But when the money ran out, the Carlier family turned away from them. Trembling and in tears, she remembered that her mistress had been kidnapped by bandits and sold into slavery, and now she didn't even know where to look for Lillian. Gathering her strength, Shiloh shouted that even if she died, she would return in spirit again and again until Cain died. The guard couldn't stand such audacity. He wrung her hands and ordered her to be silent. Then, turning to the master, he asked if it was not worth getting rid of this girl, but Cain ordered to leave her alive. Bending down to her level, he sincerely apologized for her mistress's fate and promised to help in the search for Lillian, despite her hatred. At the same time, he stated that until then, she would spend time in the dungeon of the Carlier estate to cool down. Cain ordered the soldiers to treat her with respect, and then ordered the captive to be taken away, and the order was immediately carried out. Left with Zen, he listened to his apologies for not noticing the killer, but rejected them, since he himself had ordered to leave him alone. The young man understood that the debts of the Carlier family could not be paid by ordinary means. So he considered what sacrifices he would have to make to save the lands. But despite everything, things were going better than he had expected, and it was time to plan the next step. With relief, he decided to return to the estate, and Zen willingly supported him. It had been over a month since Cain's army had been at the front, and 7 days since victory in the west. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the estate, 2 maids were sweeping the yard and talking, rejoicing that the master was about to return, because Palladium had been defeated, and the gangs had been defeated. Eileen impatiently asked when he would arrive because she wanted to see him after a long separation. Another maid, having learned that Cain had been attacked by a murderer, talked about it frivolously, not realizing how it would hurt Eileen. The girl staggered in fright and almost fainted when she heard these words, although they quickly explained to her that the gentleman had survived thanks to alchemy. Linda came up and severely scolded the chatty maid who could have frightened Eileen with such rumors. Under the pretext of cleaning the kitchen, Linda abruptly pulled the girl away, leaving the agitated Eileen alone. But she just stood there and listened to every sound, waiting for the dream meeting. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves rang out. It meant that the Lord had finally returned. Stepping out of the carriage, Cain was shocked to see Eileen rushing towards him after such a long separation. The girl was overjoyed, waving her arms and shouting only one name, Mr. Cain. The young man felt what happiness it was to return to a place where people were waiting for him. They hugged, and he reminded himself that he had promised to return, and he had kept his word. At the Carlier estate, having finished his business, Cain asked one of Justine's maids to bring him tea, and she quickly carried out his order. Justine served the young gentleman his favorite tea, brewed at the perfect temperature. Cain admitted that the girl had no equal in this art. Comforted by the praise, she flirtatiously asked if he wanted something sweet. The young man couldn't resist, as he especially loved chocolate. Justine noticed that he had eaten all the sweets immediately after returning to the estate, and it looked sweet. Cain made excuses. His body needed a lot of sweets. In fact, he did not like being teased, and might have been angry at such words. But the maid flirtatiously explained that she did not want to anger the good master. She bowed before him, lifting the hem of her dress slightly, as if asking for forgiveness for her guilt. Cain realized her tricks, and thought that it might be tempting for a young man. But an old soul could not be fooled by such tricks. But the hem rose higher and higher. The Lord hurriedly ordered her to lower her clothes. In response, Justine asked not to tell Eileen about this moment. Kane was outraged by the audacity and asked to leave him alone. Just then, Eileen entered the office, barely hearing her name mentioned. The situation became extremely awkward. Unsuspecting, she awkwardly said that she had brought tea, but immediately cut herself off, remembering the words she had just overheard. Kane sat with a tense face, and the two maids looked at each other silently, smiling nervously. He hastily drained his hot cup of tea and, to relieve the tension, muttered that he was very thirsty. He immediately asked Eileen to pour him more, and she happily complied. Justine, with a hint of bitterness in her voice, remarked how attentive the gentleman was to Eileen. She was offended, feeling a lack of attention, and Kane was outraged by the female moods around him. After the war and victories, people treated the young lord with great respect. Although he was only temporarily in office, he gained not only the recognition of the people, but also the attention of the maids, who now began to show interest in him. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to be alone with Eileen. He found himself missing her lap as a pillow. Looking at the two competing maids with their forced smiles, he felt the absurdity of the situation. So he abruptly refused to continue drinking tea and asked everyone to leave the office, finally ordering Eileen to call Sebastian. Bowing their heads, the girls obeyed, although resentment burned inside. Outside the door, they instantly turned away from each other, not wanting to meet each other's eyes again. Kane finally breathed a sigh of relief, and immediately heard the quiet voice of the butler, who was already hurrying toward him. Sebastian considered it impolite to keep the gentleman waiting, so he immediately began the conversation. He guessed that the position he had previously rejected because he considered Kane unsuitable for it would be discussed again. Sebastian explained that although the riots were suppressed by the force of Goliath and the others, the young lord still needed an administrative advisor with knowledge of the matter. He asked for some time to think, because the future of these lands would depend on the choice. Kane agreed and immediately moved on to another topic, Count Louis. It had been a long time since he had sent him a letter asking for help, but he had not received any reply. This could mean that something had happened to his uncle. The young man even suggested that he had become a puppet of Count Palladium. But if all went well, Kane wanted to meet him in person and enlist his support in reviving these lands, so he was going to head to the Lynn Garden Fortress. Sebastian, having listened to the young lord's arguments, decided to immediately prepare the horses for the journey to the fortress. When Kane went out into the courtyard, he met Goliath, who asked if the lord was going to go with them to capture Lynn Garden. Kane seriously replied that he was only going there to talk to the count and had no plans for any adventures. The commander insisted that it was better to conquer the fortress, as it was an ideal base for an army. But Kane did not share this opinion. Jeff noticed that the young gentleman was more comfortable in the estate than in the cold walls of the fortress. Goliath just shrugged it off, saying they were exaggerating. There was nothing special about that fortress. He pointed out that the building was on Carlier's land, and therefore belonged to Kane himself. But Jeff stood his ground. Kane broke off the argument and ordered them to set off, for the journey was long and tiring. He reminded that the legal owner of the lands is his father, and he is only fulfilling his duties. For the soldiers there was no difference. For them, Carlier's son already had equal power. Time was running out, so everyone agreed that it was best to leave immediately. Kane tried to refuse a large escort, saying it was just a meeting, not a siege. But Goliath stood his ground, ready to give his life for his master. He instructed Garay to guard the estate, while he himself prepared to leave. Kane, tired of the delays, only hurried on his way. Garay assured the commander that he would be able to maintain order. Not even a mouse would slip past his eyes. Having gathered everything they needed, the three set off from the estate, full of expectations for the upcoming meeting. The Lynn Garden Fortress was more like a city with high walls. People called it the Fortress City, because its fortifications were even stronger than those of the capital. When they reached the suspension bridge, they were stunned. It was raised, preventing them from crossing the river and getting inside. Kane wondered. The raised bridge meant the residents couldn't go out for food or weapons. But the supplies in the fortress should be enough. He was concerned about something else. Why the bridge had been raised now. Goliath didn't care about explanations. He seethed with rage that Carlia's people were being so blatantly ignored. The young lord tried to calm the general down, knowing that such actions would only aggravate the situation. Jeff also supported him. But Goliath became even more furious. He shouted at the walls, reminding them of who was standing before them. He called out Kane Carlier's name, indignant that the son of a great family had not been properly welcomed. There was no response, and the bridge remained raised. Kane remembered another fortress in the city of Mito, which was also impossible to get into. Goliath was not going to stop. He was burning with the desire to prove the impudent people wrong by force. Kane himself even thought about breaking through the walls himself, but rejected the idea in time. Goliath noticed that the young man was lost in thought, but Cain decided to step back and watch to find out what was happening. Having set up camp near the walls, Cain noted that the general was too hot-tempered and noisy to be heard throughout the district. But he also wondered why the arrival of the Lord himself had been ignored. Cain recalled his suspicions. Perhaps his uncle had conspired with Palladium. But if that were true, the troops would already be moving west. The young man continued to think. There was no answer from the fortress. The bridge was raised, and he was torn by doubts about everything that was happening. Perhaps the fortress city had been taken over by bandits, or perhaps his uncle had been murdered and usurped power. Cain considered many versions, because the explanation could have been anything. With a smile, he noted that they had made a noise under the bridge, and if there were really enemies hiding there, they would have come out to kill them long ago. Goliath was stunned, because he had expected a completely different development. Cain knew this, but he deliberately used his general's impatience to test the situation. Goliath was upset that the young man had taken advantage of him like that. And Jeff only smiled, acknowledging the Lord's wisdom. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard nearby. Goliath ordered Cain to stay put so as not to put him in danger. But his friends were not going to abandon the master himself. And although the general believed in his own strength, going there alone would mean suicide. Cain and Jeff rushed after him. Full of determination, Goliath drew his weapon and asked the unfamiliar warriors if they were from the fortress garrison. His comrades were already standing behind him. A striking picture opened before them. The horses, banners, and armor were adorned with the coat of arms of the House of Carlier. These were Count Louis's soldiers, so Cain's uncle was alive. But still, the young man was confused because he did not understand what was happening. He wondered if his grandfather had really conspired with Palladium. But it was unlikely, because then it would have been easier to send him to his death on a Western campaign and not get his hands dirty. In a strong voice, Cain ordered Goliath and Jeff to lower their weapons, not wanting to provoke a conflict until he could clarify the situation. He introduced himself as the temporary Lord Cain Carlier, stating that he was ruling on behalf of his father, and arrived at the fortress for a personal conversation with its steward. One of the soldiers, jumping off his horse, identified himself as Antero Falcone. He confirmed that he had heard the alarm at the gate and happily agreed to accompany the young gentleman inside. The main bridge turned out to be broken, so Louis's squad led Cain, Goliath, and Jeff across the freight bridge, and they found themselves inside the walls of the fortress city. Lord noted to himself that the wait-and-see strategy had worked, and it was worth just observing from the start. Already at the large table, where there was a lot of food, Goliath offered the gentleman a piece of ham, but Cain refused. Jeff noticed that the young man did not like too fatty food. Goliath became irritated, saying that his friend Jeff was allowing himself too much, putting himself above the Lord. Jeff calmly replied that the young gentleman always eats small but hearty meals, and he eats not by quantity, but by quality. Cain hurried to reconcile his friends, reminding them to enjoy their dinner. He always ate slowly, savoring every bite, and the marinated duck served this time seemed especially exquisite to him. Meanwhile, Jeff drained an entire jug of wine, angering Goliath even more. He liked the drink, and even dreamed of getting a sample for his grandfather. Cain also thought that Sebastian would be happy with such a gift. They all felt at ease, although they had not yet seen Count Louis. Jeff was in high spirits and only regretted that the gentleman was too young for such drinks. He jokingly suggested they have a drink together, but Goliath flatly refused. They were guards and had no right to get drunk on duty. Cain noted Jeff's surprising calmness, while the others were already nervous. Jeff was completely relaxed. They were in the possession of Count Louis, Cain's great-uncle, so there was no danger. Goliath didn't think so. And suddenly a girl appeared in the hall, dressed in knight armor over a dress. Looking at Cain, she noted skeptically that the soldiers weren't joking. She really was just a child. Immediately, the warriors stood beside the Lord, covering him, because no one knew for what purpose this stranger had come. Goliath, apologizing for his abruptness, introduced himself as a bodyguard for temporary Lord Cain, and assumed that the girl was of noble birth. He asked her to give her name. The girl in response remarked that the two soldiers looked like ordinary robbers, but out of politeness introduced herself. She was the daughter of Count Louis, named Zenaida. It turned out that she and Cain were related, which surprised the young man immensely. He tried to remember her name and the story of his great-uncle's only daughter, who was said to be extremely stubborn, but still, Cain longed to meet Count Louis himself in person. To this, Zenaida replied indignantly that she should not be underestimated, because she can safely speak on behalf of her father. The young man, seeing the youth of his interlocutor, asked her age. The girl flared up with anger. Such questions were considered offensive by a lady of her position. However, she quickly changed her anger to kindness and, given their kinship, agreed to reveal her age. She said she would be 16 this year. Kane apologized, thinking he and she were almost the same age. Zenaida almost exploded with indignation. She categorically did not consider herself a teenager. Bowing his head, Kane reminded himself that he was the current Lord of Carlier, confirmed by the Ramres royal family. He hinted that her behavior could be interpreted as an insult to the Ramses royal family, or a manifestation of ignorance, explaining that she was still too young to realize everything. The girl took it as a mockery. Although Kane had no malicious intent, her heart filled with rage. With tears in her eyes, Zenaida shouted that he was mocking her knowledge and dignity. The young man hurried to calm her down, assuring her that he would never dare to do such a thing, and suggested that she cool off with a cup of iced tea. Kane asked about the Count's condition, and Zenaida replied that his father was getting worse. He lay in bed almost all day, mostly sleeping, and therefore was unable to help in the war. Concerned about his health, the girl left the monastery and took over the management of the fortress. Kane immediately realized that the convent's pupil had no protection from male attention, and decided to check it out. Kneeling down, he said that such a burden was too heavy for her fragile shoulders, and in any case she should turn to him for help. Embarrassed, the girl began to object, but the young man continued, pointing out her beauty and the fact that it was not fitting for her to wear armor and rule the city without support. Apologizing for his abruptness, Kane asked permission to help her and kissed her fragile hand. Zenaida was confused and shocked. Embarrassed, she admitted her own guilt and excessive arrogance in her words about the young gentleman. She also admitted that she was the one who ordered the soldiers to find them at the gate without telling her father about Kane's arrival. That was her mistake. She immediately ran out to tell the Count about the young lord's arrival, leaving both soldiers watching the scene in complete astonishment. They noticed the young man's cunning move and even asked if it was right to treat women like that. Kane was confused by such questions. The warriors jokingly suggested that the girl had already fallen in love with him, while Kane himself wondered if he had overplayed his role. A tall, gray-haired, bearded old man entered the room. He was led by the arms of two gentle twin maids. From the threshold, he apologized to Kane for the long wait. The young man greeted him sincerely, delighted to see his great-uncle, who had come to discuss the problem with the bandits. He apologized for coming uninvited, but Count Louis, though exhausted, was glad to see his relative. The old man hinted at fatigue and suggested postponing the difficult topics until the morning. But Kane insisted. There were too many questions, and he didn't want to delay. In a stern voice, the Count ordered not to rush and to let him rest. Kane remembered that his great-uncle had always been described as a man of frail health. At 60, he looked extremely frail, but his gaze was still strong and firm. The atmosphere in the room was cold, and the brief conversation did not bode well. Kane looked warily at the twin maids. He had never seen them at the Carlier estate, and did not know how long they had been serving in Louis's household. The old Count cast a stern, almost menacing glance at the young man, as if sensing his suspicions. The young lord hastened to calm his relative, wished him good night, and decided to postpone the conversation until tomorrow. Goliath seethed with rage. After so many years of separation, the Count had greeted his grandson so coldly and even driven him away. Kane only joked, blaming it all on his poor health and the surprise of the visit. Jeff was more positive. He agreed that it would be unfair to force a sick old man into lengthy negotiations. Kane scolded Goliath for his recklessness. Louis was his grandfather's brother, a man Goliath himself had once respected. He demanded that he not forget that. The warrior fainted, feeling the ambiguity of his words and actions. He hastily made excuses, saying he simply forgot and it came out involuntarily. When the tension disappeared, Goliath suddenly remembered his hunger. Jeff wondered why he hadn't eaten at the table. Kane realized that he was too nervous to touch the food, and suggested that they go to the kitchen together. Left alone, the young man fell heavily onto the bed. He knew that his uncle had always avoided conflicts and enemies, had never been a threat to him. But the old man's reaction seemed too cold. Count Louis, upon meeting him, showed no warmth and did not even want to talk. As these thoughts swirled around in his head, Kane felt the situation growing stranger and stranger. He had to do anything to get the old man to talk frankly, but he understood. One careless word and the entire fortress would turn into enemies. There was even an idea to send Jeff for help, so that in case of betrayal, they would have an army behind them. Waking up from his thoughts, the young man remembered that his friends had gone out to get food a long time ago and still hadn't returned. To be honest, he himself was craving something sweet right now, as he always did when Eileen brought treats without any requests. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Kane was allowed to enter. The twins stood on the doorstep with a tray of tea and fruit. It was Count Louis's order. The young man met them warily. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, and he ordered them not to come any closer. The eldest of them smiled and said that a true lord should calculate his actions in advance. but assured him that they had only brought treats. Kane took the opportunity to ask if they had seen his guards. The girls replied that they had not seen anyone. Without letting go of the weapon, the young man asked their names. For the maids, it was a joy to receive even a little bit of his attention. The eldest was called Liz. She was a twin sister. The younger one was named Lee, and she was an exact copy of her charming sister. They, their eyes shining, looked at Kane with expressive sympathy, as if devouring him with their gaze. Embarrassed, he ordered the tray to be left by the door and to leave his chambers immediately. But the girls stubbornly refused to leave, and Kane even threatened to call the guards. But the twins only advised him not to be so cruel to them. Liz confessed how happy her sister was about the arrival of the young lord, and these words made Lee blush even more. The young man looked at the sisters with disbelief, and the eldest, in despair, covered her face with her hands, ashamed of her own frankness.